Aha, and we're live. Hello there, folks, out there in YouTube land. Thank you very much for joining me. We're just on a wee quick minute early, as always, just to check that everything's working okay with sound and vision. Looks like we've got a green light, got a bit of green for the sound machine. Everything looks good. That's grand. And as usual, I just have to get organised a bit. But once we hit 10 o'clock, we'll say hello to everybody. So in the meantime, if anybody's out there, say hello. As we said the other night there, we promised to hop on and get an extra episode done this week. Mainly because they're quite short chapters. I'm going just to kind of drive on towards the back of the book. And there's 9 o'clock now, folks. So I will say hello. Thank you very much for joining me. I'm Doc Sloan. Welcome to my science fiction station, also known as the Doghouse. And here we have our ongoing original series, Dune Book Club, on our third volume now, Children of Dune. And we're up to chapter 57 of this novel, and there's not a lot more to go, really. Let me see, in terms of my book, we've got 46 pages to the finish. And again, our chapter after this will be 5.5 pages. The one after that will be 8.5. Another short one followed at 4. Let's see, another one 5 in my copy. Then a big one of 13. Small one of 6, and then the final chapter, which I think is about 10 pages. So that's what we've got to get through. So yeah, we're getting there, and I'm kind of excited about it. It's good get towards the end of the book. Let's see, our chapter tonight is only 4 pages in my copy of the book. Do we have a couple of mistakes in this one? I'm not too sure. We had a couple of hiders in the previous one. I think we might have a couple. Oh yeah, we've got Actually, we're not going to get off the epigraph without a couple of mistakes, which is interestingly enough. So that's where they mostly occur. And interestingly enough, I've used the Berkeley and the current edition that I'm working with, which is the Golance Science Fiction edition, these ones, to put together a proper epigraph, because both versions of it that we have here, I suppose, have mistakes in them, you know. Let's have a wee look. So we'll just quickly read it here for you. Epigraph 57. I've entitled this chapter Alia and the Baron, or She Who Must Be Obeyed. Epigraph 57. Any path which narrows future possibilities may become a lethal trap. Humans are not threading their way through a maze. They scan a vast horizon filled with unique opportunities. The narrowing viewpoint of the maze should appeal only to creatures with their noses buried in the sand. Sexually produced uniqueness and differences are the life protection of the species. In my copy, it says species. I think in the in the Berkeley's there we have spices. Actually, the electronic copy that I have has spices as the last word there. So between the two of them, we get a correct epigraph. There's mistakes here in mine. I've got mistakes with punctuation, etc. And I think in the Berkeley, the last word there is spices, and it should be species. So there we go. And this is from the Spacing Guild Handbook. So again, about threading possibilities of picking out one particular future path and running with it. This kind of thing, that this creates traps. And the narrowing viewpoint, I suppose, that you gain from doing this should only appeal, according to the guild, to creatures with their noses buried in the sand. Sexually produced uniqueness and differences are the life protection of the species. So in other words, as much variety as possible. Variety is the spice of life. In that sense, no pun intended. So there we go. Let's just get my copy of the book open here. And my office is a complete mess as usual. Folks, there we are. I'm working on taping up. It's a bit of a delicate matter. I'm going to try and get my copy of pardon me, Paul Bigelow Sears's Where There Is Life kind of taped up to a point where I can maybe utilize it one more time at least and read some of it to a future date before we get off Children of Dune. Excuse me, I've got all sorts of things here, highlighters and scalpels, not that good. The books and the scalpel and the highlighter box. Tonight we're going to get through this chapter reasonably quickly. It's a dialogue-heavy chapter, and that means, in addition to that, then that as promised, which we've been trying to do for a couple of nights, and we've either gone on too long or my throat's had a wee bit of it, but we promised to read a couple of chapters from Lord Raglan's Hero, which is a very influential book on Frank Herbert, and especially the ideas of the hero within the Dune series. So we're going to have particularly in relation to what we're looking at within this book that's been running through this a fair bit. We're going to have a look, I suppose, at myth and ritual in particular, which is part 2, and a little bit about tradition, I suppose, if we can fish out the right stuff. And we'll also run through very quickly with you the 22 steps, the systemic approach that Lord Raglan has to the hero, that Paul Atreides is very much mapped out upon. And it's the archetype for this hero is Oedipus. So we're going to have a wee natter about that. That's them there. There we go. If we get into focus with them. And yeah, I think I've put one of my videos has this exact thing with putting Paul into all the different steps. It's kind of a I don't know, a sort of quantitative attempt at comparison between different myths, if you like, as to how many of the different heroes fulfill the different steps in this kind of ritualistic pattern that the hero goes through. So we're going to have a read of that tonight, which is looking forward to that. But there we go. Yes, indeed. So first of all, our chapter 57 epigraph, mistakes in both this, and that would include the New English Library. All the different versions that I have of it have some typographic errors, and as far as I know, the electronic version that I have, which is at Berkeley, I believe, we have the last word there saying spices when it should be species. So between the two of them, hopefully what we've read to is the correct, with the correct punctuation in as well. You might not have noticed that so much. The way through a maze. The first maze there, for example, has a comma in my copy, and it should be a semicolon. Sorry, I probably should have pointed that out. That was me being a bit sloppy there. So just to be clear, my copy, any path which narrows future possibilities may become a lethal trap. Full stop. Humans are not threading their way through a maze. In my copy, it's a comma, and it should be a semicolon. They scan a vast horizon, etc. And then, of course, I said in the Berkeley edition, the last word there that we have here in this copy, species, and that version it's spices. So just to avoid any confusion, it should be species, which makes a lot more sense. So here we go, folks. Let's have a wee look. There's some aspects of Alia's character, I suppose, that we could have a look at in this chapter. And the question that I'm kind of running with really is, especially from what we've been told by Duncan Idaho, who's now deceased, that Alia's gone. My ongoing question with Alia's character here is how much of her personality actually remains here. Right, so let's get cracking. Where are we? I get some fluids here first. So our setting here is again back to the palace. This is Alia's audience chamber, and we're just before noon. So this is Alia here. Why do I not feel grief? Alia directed the question at the ceiling of her small audience chamber, a room she could cross in 10 paces one way and 15 the other. It had 2 tall and narrow windows which looked out across the Arrakis rooftops at the shielded wall. It was almost noon. The sun burned down into the pan upon which the city had been built. Alia lowered her gaze to Buer Argaves, the former Tabrite and now aide to Zia, who directed the temple guards. Tabrite, in that sense, it's a use of the word Tabr. I suppose a resident of Sietch Tabr is a Tabrite. Now a guide to Zia, who directed the temple guards. Argaves had brought the news that Javid and Idaho were dead. A mob of sycophants, aides, and guards had come in with him, and more crowded the areaway outside, revealing that they already knew Argaves' message. Oh, I missed the letter there when I wrote his name down there. Oh no, I wrote it down. I keep doing that with his name. His name confuses me. That pen is dead. Right, hang on. Bear with me a wee second, folks. I've got such a tickly nose tonight. Right, it's Argaves. Right, there we go. AG. There we go. That's that fixed. Bad news travelled fast on Arrakis. So here we get a bit of a profile of Buer Argaves. He was a small man, this Argaves, with a round face for a Fremen, almost infantile in its roundness. He was one of the new breed who had gone to water fatness. Alia saw him as though he had been split into two images. One with a serious face and opaque indigo eyes, a worried expression around the mouth. The other image, sensuous and vulnerable, excitingly vulnerable. She especially liked the thickness of his lips. Now, I've written uh-oh here. Pardon me. The two images here, I suppose, is in reality that there's two personalities looking at this man through the one body's set of eyes, if you like. And we have to go with it. And again, this is where I'm asking this question: how much of Alia is still viable within her own body? How much does she have any agency? How much of her personality remains? I think it's a very interesting question. And so I think the reality here that what we see, the two images, the serious face with the opaque indigo eyes, a worried expression around the mouth. This is Alia's viewpoint of this individual. The other is the Baron's desire coming through, sensuous and vulnerable, excitingly vulnerable. She especially liked the thickness of his lips. Now I've written, first of all, with also the description, he's small with a round face for a Fremen, almost infantile in its roundness. He's water fat. The point is, infantile, that use of that word, he's almost childlike. This is to satisfy the Baron's sexual needs here. And when, especially when we get this, she especially liked the thickness of his lips. It's interesting that we have that female pronoun there. But the reality of it is it's the Baron who especially liked the thickness of his lips. He especially liked the thickness of his lips. Pardon me. So I suppose what I'm trying to get at here is what I'm starting to get a sense of is that the Baron's almost becoming the dominant personality here. With Alia's personality receding more and more into the background here. And so it's almost impossible, pretty much, I think, at a certain point to figure out who's who, if you see what I mean. And why do I not feel grief, I think, is possibly Alia slipping through. But in actuality, I'm not sure. It could also be the Baron. In fact, I'm actually, the more I think about it, it is the Baron with a little bit of theatre to suggest why he's not going to be, in a full process of grief and grieving, etc. And there's, I suppose, he creates a little way out here. So I've also written that the description of Buer Argaves, I've written underneath that it sounds a little like the description of the Baron way back in Dune. He has a round face. It's described as cherubic, with little spider-like eyes, black eyes, isn't he? Etc., etc. So the thing I've written next, this with where it says she especially liked the thickness of his lips. I've written next that and the Baron, and question: is she gone, or is this them merging, if you like, into one personality that's going to be dominantly the Baron? Oh, there's the ladies barking. Apologies about that, folks. So I suppose we're going to see the Baron's personal, I suppose how the Baron, Alia, if you like, is going to use Buer here, Buer Argaves. So although it was not yet noon, Alia felt something in the shocked silence around her that spoke of sunset. And we get Alia's thoughts here. Idaho should have died at sunset, she told herself. Now, it's an odd little thing to think. It almost sounds in a kind of way that romantic in a funny way. Um, Felt something in the shocked silence around her that spoke of sunset. I however, think it's more a bit of religious engineering and that kind of thing. There's Julian Thompson saying, "Hi, Doc. Hi, Julian. How you doing? Thanks very much for joining us tonight." Well, I just said that. Oh, put the live chat on thingy there. It's a quiet one tonight, Julian, but thank you. How you doing? I hope you're keeping well. We'll just throw this extra little chapter out there and do a wee bit of reading from the hero tonight, I think, as we said. But yeah, and plans of mice and men and all that. So I'm not expecting to be sort of scared with somebody walking in the house tonight. This kind of thing. But I hope you're doing well. Let's see. So yeah, it's a kind of weird thing. It's almost, I think, maybe an attempt to should have died at sunset, she told herself. Um, I don't know, is it to make it romantic? Is it to make it part of a myth building exercise? Propaganda? For what reason would it have been better that he died at sunset? How is it, Buer, that you're the bearer of this news? She asked, noting the watchful quickness which came into his expression. Argaves tried to swallow, spoke in a hoarse voice, hardly more than a whisper. I went with Javid, you recall? And when Stilgar sent me to you, he said for me to tell you that I carried his final obedience. Final obedience? She echoed. What do you mean by that? I don't know, Lady Alia, he pleaded. Explain to me again what you saw, she ordered, and she wondered at how cold her skin felt. So as a bit of a, kind of what do you call it, goosebumps, this kind of thing, tingling of the skin. And we get, within the message from Argaves, we have this term from Stilgar, which is his final obedience, which is basically sending this guy to Alia, and that's them done pretty much, isn't it? It's the last act of obedience that he'll ever give to Alia, which suggests strongly that well, from that point, that he should be in full rebellion. Alia, finding it a little bit, final obedience, she echoed, what did he mean by that? I don't know, Lady Alia, he pleaded. So we're getting the reportage to Alia, if you like, from Argaves of what's occurred at Sietch Tabr previously, with Javid and Stilgar and Duncan Idaho, leaving two of the three of them dead. Oh, ladies, behave. Sorry about that, folks. So explain to me again what you saw, she ordered, and she wondered how cold her skin felt. I saw, he bobbed his head nervously, looked at the floor in front of Alia. I saw the holy consort dead upon the floor of the central passage, and Javid lay dead nearby in a side passage, the women already preparing them for the Huawei, so that's the highway. And Stilgar summoned you to this scene? That is true, my lady. Stilgar summoned me. He sent Muad'Dib, the bent one, his messenger in Sietch. Muad'Dib gave me no warning. He merely told me Stilgar wanted me. And you saw my husband's body there on the floor? He met her eyes with a darting glance, returned his attention once more to the floor in front of her, before nodding. Yes, my lady, and Javid dead nearby. Stilgar told me that the holy consort had slain Javid. And my husband? You say Stilgar? He said it to me with his own mouth, my lady. Stilgar said he had done this. He said the holy consort provoked him to rage. Rage? Alia repeated. How was that done? He didn't say. No one said. I asked, and no one said. And that's when you were sent to me with this news. Yes, my lady. So again, I was saying that I found that the chapter where where Stilgar ends up killing Duncan Idaho. Duncan Idaho kills Javid and provokes Stilgar into killing him. I found it quite funny. And that part of me almost wishes that Frank had a bit, I suppose, a superior sense of humor about maybe that this was a bit more funny. Because how was this done? We know at this point that it was the three things that you can never say to a Fremen. And I was just in my own head thinking it would be quite funny to have those three things repeated one at a time. The first, he said, the first terrible thing you could ever say to truly dangerous, truly fatal things that you could say to a Fremen. And being asked what was said, the response here, I think, in relation to that is funny because he didn't say, no one said, I asked, and no one said. And I've written next to that, I still think that's funny, probably because it's something that's so utterly offensive to Fremen. And that's when you were sent to me with this news, yes, my lady. So this is Stilgar sending the message. I said to let her know what has happened is his last act of obedience, I think. Now, here we see a bit of the psychotic personality coming in here, I think. And it's a little bit of this is in relation to one of our previous epigraphs. Oh, I hate when I do this because I always think it's the previous one that's not. That's back a good few chapters now. It was to do with guilt. If you see what I mean, and controlling your population with guilt. Bear with me a wee second. Let me just see if I can figure it out. Oh, it's not that one. Nope, not that one either. Bear with me a wee second. No, that's maybe a good while back I'm thinking of. No, I'm not seeing it. I'll not worry about it, folks. Let me see. Nope. My brain's probably latched onto something from quite a while back. Oh, sorry, I'm not finding it there. I thought it was something maybe way back with Thomas Aquinas or something like that, but there was something about guilt. And what we've got here is, I suppose, baiting. I think this is Alia / the Baron baiting Argaves, possibly with a little bit of guilt. The thing's got nothing to do with them, really. But here we go. Was there nothing you could do? This is the beginning of the setup. Argaves wet his lips with his tongue. Then, Stilgar commanded, my lady. It was his Sietch. I see. And you always obeyed Stilgar? I always did, my lady, until he freed me from my bond. When you were sent to my service, you mean? I obey only you now, my lady. Is that right? Tell me, Buer, if I commanded you to slay Stilgar, your old naib, would you do it? He met her gaze with a growing firmness. If you commanded it, my lady. I do command it. Have you any idea where he's gone? Into the desert. That's all I know, my lady. How many men did he take? Perhaps half the effectives. And Ganima and Irulan with him? Yes, my lady. Those who left are burdened with their women, their children, and their baggage. Stilgar gave everyone a choice, go with him or be freed of their bond. Many chose to be freed. They will select a new naib. And it's interesting, I think, that he drops this here. I wonder how astute Argaves is. Maybe it's just not matter of fact that that's what happens with the Fremen. I think it's a little bit strange, actually, in the sense that it kind of relies on Stilgar and his people not coming back to the siege. But a new naib for a new, I've written next to this, for a new Tabr, possibly. And we get this response from Alia with an exclamation mark slammed onto it. I'll select their new naib, and it'll be you, Buer Argaves, on the day you bring me Stilgar's head. Argaves could accept selection by battle. It was a Fremen way. He said, as you command, my lady, what forces may I see, Zia? I can't give you many thopters for the search. They're needed elsewhere. But you'll have enough fighting men. Stilgar has defamed his honour. Many will serve with you gladly. I'll get about it then, my lady. Wait. She studied him a moment, reviewing whom she could send to watch over this vulnerable infant. He would need close watching until he'd proved himself. Zia would know whom to send. Now, let's just before we go any further with that. So basically a bit of a setup here with Alia goading Argaves into this, but at the same time, Argaves, there's the firmness in his eyes. It's his chance to rise, isn't it? And his chance to rise is going to be to kill Stilgar. Alia kind of reminds me a wee bit on, it's kind of a bit like bring me the head of John the Baptist, this kind of thing. Who would that be? Is it Herodias and Salome? I'm thinking of, yeah. Now, interestingly enough, in terms of our traditions and rituals, things that have been happening, we've been talking about change, etc., in the previous chapter. We get the first thing is that in terms of the Fremen tradition, and it is bring me Stilgar's head there, by the way. I think the connotations of that's kind of interesting, isn't it? As it does remind you a wee bit on bring me the head of John the Baptist, this kind of thing, Herodias and Salome, etc. But at the same time, in terms of if it's not a one-on-one combat, and I think that Buer Argaves would not go near that with a would be decimate, that's the wrong word, would be just annihilated by Stilgar. But if he's got an army with him and he goes and acts and does it in battle, this challenging to the authority, he can accept that because that's part of Fremen tradition. And so the take Stilgar out, if you like, command from Alia has been framed in such a way that his Fremen sensibilities will allow him to accept to do this. I'll get it about weight. And so again, we're going to jump back a little bit actually. How he's been described here so far, Buer Argaves, almost infantile in its roundness, as his face, water fat. Alia saw him as though he'd been split in two, the serious face, but then the other side of it, the sensuous and vulnerable, excitingly vulnerable. She especially liked the thickness of his lips. That's the Baron talking. We get more of this here, that he wants this. This is going almost someone who's happy to do Alia the Baron's dirty work for them, but at the same time, someone who the Baron is sexually attracted to, and therefore wishes to protect. And again, describes this man who is just asked to commit, go out and kill Stilgar, as a vulnerable infant. It's a kind of self-delusion, isn't it, in some ways, from the Baron's personality point of view. And again, it's maybe some sort of hybrid of the Baron and Alia's personalities. Studied him a moment, reviewing whom she could send to watch over this vulnerable infant. This is Buer Argaves we're talking about. He would need close watching until he proved himself. Zia would know whom to send. Am I not dismissed, my lady? Oh, sorry. Very quickly, by the way, I've got to jump back. We forgot about Muad'Dib. Muad'Dib, the bent one. The crooked one, the bent one. That's a bit of a meaning in Irish mythology. That's Crom. Crom is the crooked one, isn't he? Crom Croch. Muad'Dib, the bent one. Muad'Dib is a part of West African variation of the Arabic Muad'Dib, which means well-mannered. Nearly said that right there. Well-mannered educator. well, as one who's disciplined, etc. Teacher, basically. The same as that, it's another version of Muad'Dib, basically. Muad'Dib. The bent one is the messenger within Sietch. That's an interesting thing, I suppose, because what it does give us is a sense of we've talked about disability within the Fremen, I suppose, before. Mainly, the main thing that we see is up until, well, during Dune, I suppose, from Dune Messiah, things are a little bit different within the new empire. But the main thing that we see is that how the blind are treated. But we've often commented that it'd be a very stupid resource for the Fremen to waste disabled people in such a society. The suggestion is here is one of these people, Muad'Dib, the bent one, is a messenger in Sietch. And his name would possibly suggest he's also a teacher as well. Julian saying the autocrat provides his populace opportunities for fear. I think that's the bit I was thinking of, isn't it? That Simile is widely discussed in Decadent Movement, Moro, Heisman, Wild Love, talking about the story. Simile, Decadent Movement. Shalom, yes. Goodness, have you seen, Julian, what's the it's really good. It's really weird, but it's the Ken Russell film. Oh goodness, and it's about Oscar Wilde, isn't it? It's the Salome play. Let me see. Is it just called Salome? Hang on a second. Tell you what it is. If you haven't seen it, it's well, Ken Russell films are Ken Russell films, aren't they? I like Ken Russell. Let me see. What am I thinking of? What have we got? The Music Lovers, The Devils. Oh goodness, he did Lair of the White Wolf. Oh, not Lair of the White Wolf. Sorry, Lair of the White Worm. I'm getting my stuff mixed up there, which is fantastic. I think that's what do you call his first film? What's his name? Hugh Grant. Bear with me. Sorry, I'm not seeing it here. What are we? What's it called? Got Salome's Last Dance. There we go. It's a sort of bunch of good films there. Altered States, Gothic, Salome's Last Dance, The Lair of the White Worm, the Rainbow. Ladies Behave. That's the one I'm thinking of. Salome's Last Dance, 1988, British film written and directed by Ken Russell. Most of the action is a verbatim performance of Oscar Wilde's 1891 play Salome, which itself is based on a story from the New Testament. Also, framing narrative was written by Russell. Very, very good. It's definitely bizarro. Who have we got in it? Glenda Jackson. Ken Russell's in it. Stratford Johns is Herod Antipas, Nicholas Grace is Oscar Wilde, Douglas Hodges, John the Baptist, Imogen Millay Scott is Salome Road. Yeah, that's an interesting one. If you haven't seen it, check it out. No worries, I've got who you were talking about, Julian. Salome, sorry, he says. Yes, indeed. Just very reminiscent of it here, I thought. All right, where are we? Let's see. So, am I not dismissed, my lady? You're not dismissed. I must consult you privately and at length of your plans to take Stilgar. She put a hand to her face. I'll not grieve until you've exacted my revenge. Give me a few moments to compose myself. She lowered her hand. One of my attendants will show you the way. She gave a subtle hand signal to one of her attendants, whispered to Chalice, her new dame of chamber. Have him washed and perfumed before you bring him. He smells of worm. Yes, mistress. That's Chalice responding. Chalice, the new Dame of the Chamber. Dame of the Chamber got me thinking of Sherlock again. That was a demon of the privy, but not quite in this sense. I think the best that I've got from Chalice is that comes from the Hebrew word shalut, which is suggestive of neglect, an error, something that's not right, something that's amiss, if that makes sense, which is an interesting enough name. The other thing I meant to point out, by the way, very quickly, is that the help that she offers Argaves here isn't in the form of technical help, if you like, in terms of material, if you like. It's not ornithopters and artillery and this kind of thing. Ladies, it's just manpower. So this also, Julian, it kind of got me reminded. It started reminding me on things like She, H. Rider Haggard's Aisha, She Who Must Be Obeyed. Goodness, and all the different sort of versions of that character, Axa, and oh, good, there's tons, aren't there? Deathstalker 2 is one as well, actually. But also, yeah, Alia's got new staff here. Along with Zia, we've got this Chalice here, and the response, yes, mistress, is that perhaps Alia, the Baron, is surrounding themselves, if you like. It starts to get a bit tricky, isn't it? With certain types of individuals, I suppose. Alia turned then, feigning the grief she did not feel, and fled to her private chambers. There in her bedroom, she slammed the door into its tracks, cursed and stamped her foot. Damn that Duncan! Why? 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 She sensed a deliberate provocation from Idaho. He'd slain Javid and provoked Stilgar. It said he knew about Javid. The whole thing must be taken as a message from Duncan Idaho, a final gesture. Yes, indeed, that's exactly what it is. Again, she stamped her foot, and again, raging across the bedchamber. Damn him! Damn him! Damn him! Are the thoughts there in the mine. Alia's thoughts. Nice little run of Bangaria there inside the mine. Stilgar had gone over to the rebels and Ganima with him. Irulan too. Damn them all! Her stamping foot encountered a painful obstacle, descending onto metal. Pain brought a cry from her, and she peered down, finding that she'd bruised her foot on a metal buckle. She snatched it up, stood frozen at the sight of it in her hand. It was an old buckle, one of the silver and platinum originals from Caladan, awarded originally by the Duke Leto Atreides I to his swordmaster, Duncan Idaho. She'd seen Duncan wear it many times, and he discarded it here. I thought I'd doodle of it. Alia's fingers clutched convulsively on the buckle. Idaho had left it here when, and then we get tears sprang from her eyes, forced against the great Fremen conditioning. Her mouth drew down into a frozen grimace, and she sensed the old battle begin within her skull. That's an interesting term there, the old battle begin. Reaching out to her fingertips, to her toes, she felt that she had become two people. One looked upon these fleshly contortions with astonishment. The other sought submission to an enormous pain spreading in her chest. The tears flowed freely from her eyes now, and the astonished one within her demanded querulously, "Who cries? Who is it that cries? Who is crying now?" But nothing stopped the tears, and she felt the painfulness which flamed through her breast as it moved her flesh and hurled her onto the bed. Still, someone demanded out of that profound astonishment, "Who cries? Who is that?" Now, that's pretty weird. And again, there's some stuff here that makes us think, what's going on with Alia and the Baron? How much of this is the Baron? And I'm going to argue that, well, I sort of I've written Alia as on my kind of script bits, if you like. Occasionally where it's absolutely obvious that the two of them are there as Alia and the Baron. But on the whole, I think almost all of this is the Baron Harkonnen. Thinking through in possession of Alia's body here. I think there's a little bit of Alia getting through, which suggests to me that she's not entirely lost here. The other sought submission to an enormous pain spreading in her chest. She's controlled by pain. And I suppose in many ways the inability to do something about what he's at. I'm wondering a little bit about the who cries. Who is it that cries? Who's crying now? Is that him taunting him? Or part of me has written down, I've written this down here, has he forgotten her already? Is he eroding her sense of self here deliberately? Is it he's going who cries? Is like who is this? You know, is it there's that little of her that remains? Is one way of looking at it. Another way is that it's him tormenting her. Who's crying? Who's that cries? Who's crying now? You know this kind of thing. Who cries? Who is that? You know, and it's almost. I don't know what you think. I'd like to know, folks. It's almost that there's so little over there that he's almost forgotten her. And of course, this belt buckle, this jogs this memory as well. Shows us also something that's quite important from the previous chapter, is that we have Gurney Idaho, the most loyal of, Atreides henchmen, for want of a better word, off and about doing his thing, separate from all the Atreides, finally free of them in a funny way. And Duncan Idaho casting off his buckle, the gift from the late Leto Atreides the First. Medals and buckles and these kind of artifacts, they tend to be cheap. This one's got a little bit of silver and platinum on it. Very nice, Seen Duncan wear it many times. He discarded it here. Both of these men, both of these utterly loyal retainers have cast off the attributes of their household, if you like. In a funny way, Idaho's free in his death here of the Firefruiters system. Gurney remains the one character that moves in and out of it quite easily within the Dune series, There's Object Graves saying, how can this be? For he is a left footer from the... Excuse me. That made me choke, Object Graves. How's it going, sir? I'm right-handed and left-footed. But how you going, Object Degree? Yes, indeed. I think you were saying there, our week got messed up a wee bit there. Meant to do some things. And I thought, what the heck? Pardon me, because we've got short chapters here at the minute. Oh, and that was pretty much it. By the way, we finished it. Who cries? Who is that? That was the end of the chapter. We thought we'd run with another one this night just because we're pushing on towards the end of the book to get it out of the road. So I think, as I said, we've got, how are we doing here at the end of tonight? 382. The last page in my copy is 426. So we've got 46 pages to go. Our next chapter is 5.5 pages. Let me see. When can we do this again next week? Possible. We can probably get another one on it at the very least. Who knows? So that's the idea. Object Degree is just to push on through, break on through to the other side, so that we can head towards God Emperor. Hopefully very soon after a couple of weeks off, basically. So that will be interesting. It's a big point that we're heading towards. We've been at this for over 3 years now, I think. Goodness gracious me! But there's a doggy out there. Pardon me. But in terms of where we would have been if Frank Herbert had lived to finish the Dune series, we're coming towards the end of the first great Dune trilogy, if you like. And you can look at the God Emperor book as a bridging book. Pardon me. At the same time, we can also look at the first two as the Paul Atreides books, even though he's in this one, because there's overlap. But this is really the first of Leto's two books as well. So whether you look at Dune as a couple of trilogies that were unfinished with a bridging book in between, or a set of 3 duologies, we're heading towards quite an important point in the book. We're heading towards a point in the book where we lose a lot of people. And we move forward 3,500 years in time, and we lose pretty much every single character but 2. many ways. It's a big change, and it's a very different animal, the God Emperor of Dune. You know, how could this be? For he is a lifted from a. There's no crying on Arrakis. I mean, baseball. Oh, here. Something I got. You just reminded me on something on J degree because I'm always on the sniff for things. Let's see, all things sci-fi, all things Dune. Even though I'm a man of limited resources, but I caught a bargain recently. Where I got a copy of Dune. What have I done with it? Should be up here. Bear with me in a second. Let's have a wee nosy. My office is an absolute shit pit, if you excuse the term. It's a real mess. Would you be in there? Oh, Conan, we've got me a Conan the Destroyer poster. Oh, stuff falling down. Where would you be? Let me see. Oh, here it is. Found it. Oh, boom, 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 boom. Oh, years and years and years and years and years ago when I was a kid. Always been a big, well, especially much more so when I was young. I was a massive Lord of the Rings fan. Huge Lord of the Rings fan, and read it several times in a row when I was a kid. Maybe it was a library book. It was one of those books where I didn't own a copy and had to keep getting it out of the library, and then had to keep handing it back to the library because it was a much requested book. But I remember reading the Boggart, Board of the Rings, which was one of the National Lampoons. Holy love, I'm getting barked at here. And there was the Boggart and Board of the Rings, which were great fun. But I played them on my computer, my Spectrum computer, I think, or possibly the Commodore, I can't remember which. And they were great fun. But so Ellis Wiener, in the rib-cracking tradition of Board of the Rings, I've picked up this, and I haven't read it yet. National Lampoon's Dune. Look at that, a couple of quid. Very nice. I was absolutely delighted this week as well. I got 2 series of the Jeremy Brett Sherlock Holmes DVDs for £2 something. And they're perfect for Nick as well. So very, very happy with that. But yes, looking forward to it. For the millions who loved that insanely popular, never-ending science fiction saga of the century. And I'm guessing it's beer related. I'll just give you the blurb here. It says, National Lampoon's Dune brings the hottest science fiction phenomenon ever to a new, hysterically foaming head. In a very distant galaxy far, far away, a plot is brewing as vast and elaborate as the Empire itself, to bottle the wild pools of beer that grow only on Dune, take control of the native pretzel population, and turn the plucky little orb into the lounge bar planet of the universe. And only one man, the slender-shouldered Paul, can stop the galaxy-wide web of intrigue that is fermenting on the savage, sugar-swept landscape of Dune. It includes a glossary of terms of the Imperium. There you go. Let me get, who's done the cover here? It's got to be, that looks like a proper Dune artist, doesn't it? What is it? I don't like it when they don't give, who am I thinking? Is that John Schoner who's done that? Not as, I'm really bad with the Dune artists. Hang on. Bear with me a second. Who am I thinking of? Who am I thinking of? I hate it when they don't put the name of an artist on a book. Let me see. There's one there. Right. There we go. That's the one I was thinking on, isn't it? It's very much of Jim Messiah. That's the one imitation of it. It's very good imitation, isn't it? No, I can't remember offhand. I don't want to get them mixed up. Can't remember. Can I remind who that, which the artist that is? It's not on either book. That's a pity. That's part of the fun of, well, books like that back in the day. Fantasy and sci-fi art was knowing, kind of checking out the artists and stuff like that as well. Let me see. I have a tell you who it is in a second. Here we go. I'm just being lazy. There we go. Bruce Pennington. Apologies to Bruce Pennington. That's the artist I'm thinking on there. I wonder, did he do the cover for Dune? Wonder would it be here? Probably not. It pretty much looks like his work, though, doesn't it? Bruce Pennington. There you go. It's a shameless copy, isn't it? Otherwise. But I'd imagine they got him to do that. But there we go. So that's something I picked up. Hopefully, it'll be a bit of fun. Seems to be very much beer related. Wallach Eli. Eli Wallach, sixth planet of Tempo Terrence. Known for its cultural sophistication, homeworld of the Boni Moroni. I'd imagine it's quite sensible. I don't know. Is the National Lampoon humor still about in America? Is it still a thing? There you go. So just and I've always enjoyed the Boggart and the Board of the Rings. I thought they were good fun. So there we go, folks. That's us at the end of chapter 57. Chapter 58 will be next week. Hopefully, I'm going to possibly get through another couple of chapters if that's possible. But we've not got much further to go. It looks like volume 3 of my notebooks is not going to cut it. I'm going to need to get a fourth notebook. So there we go, folks. We did pretty well. Wow, that was really quick. That was a longer chapter than yesterday. It's only taken us 50 minutes, I suppose. So the kind of knew it would go quite quickly today. So I suppose in a wee minute or two, if anybody's got any questions or comments about that chapter, fire away. I think this will be okay. Do I need reading glasses for this book? Let me see. So tonight, in addition, what we said was we're going to read you a couple of wee things from the hero in relation to myths and rituals, and give you a wee bit of a sense of this book, because I wasn't too sure, as much as we talk about it, wasn't too sure how easy it is to get these days in this day and age, and it probably is available on Project Gutenberg. Let's see. I always spell Gutenberg wrong. Let's see. Bosh, let's have a look. Answer no. Well, if it's not there, that's certainly one for. There's Carlisle's on Heroes, Hero Worship, and the Heroic in History, which is a good book. Interesting thing for its time. I don't see it. So that would certainly be. If it's not on Gutenberg, that would certainly be a book that would be worth getting someone to transcribe. Let's just try it again. Let's just try it. Yeah, I got nothing on them there. Let me just see. The full title of this book is. Right, hang on. Sorry, bear with me a second, folks. Gosh. No, right, there we go. It looks like I wasn't being too daft at all here. This seems to be a book that's not on Project Gutenberg. So I really don't know how easy it is to get. This is what my copy is, what you call Thinker's Library. There we go. Which used to be these. I used to, C.A. Watson Co. London Limited. These old books, Fleet Street, London. these kind of things. They're that kind of red hardback book. I love wee books like this. I've got a few of them. This one is Thinker's Libraries 1949. This was first published in 1936. Printed in Great Britain by Richard Clay and Company Limited, Bungay, Suffolk. So again, yeah. I'll just give you his blurb here. According to the book, Lord Raglan was born in 1885. Was educated at Eton and Sandhurst. He joined the Grenadier Guards in 1905 and 1913, was attached to the Egyptian army, serving with the 9th Sudanese and as district commander in the Mongolia province. He joined the army in Palestine in 1918 and spent over 2 years among the Arabs of Transjordan. In 1921, he succeeded his father and retired, and now lives on the family estate in Monmouthshire, of which county he is Lord Lieutenant. Lord Raglan was president of the anthropological section of the British Association in 1933 and of the Folklore Society from 1945 to 47. His publications include articles on the Lutuku tribe of the Sudan and the Arabs of Transjordan, Recast as Crime and the Origins of Religion. Also in the Thinker's Library, The Science of Peace, How Came Civilization and Death and Rebirth. So that's not as blurb from Wikipedia. That's actually just from the little book here. If we're on Wikipedia looking at Lord Raglan, don't confuse him with his ancestor, the other Lord Raglan. Let's see, he's the 4th, I think. Let me see. Baron Raglan. Lord Fitzroy Somerset, remembered as commander of the British troops during the Crimean War. Yeah, sufficient. He's basically this is the guy that the cause of the light brigade, the charge of the light brigade, etc. Let me see. That's not quite. Let's try that again. Sorry, bear with me a second, folks. There we have him, Fitzroy Somerset. That's how he's known, Fitzroy Somerset, 4th Baron Raglan. There we go. So his Wikipedia page is he's Fitzroy Richard Somerset, 4th Baron Raglan, FRAI, June. It dates from June 1885 to 1964 in September. He's a British soldier, author, and amateur anthropologist. His books include The Hero, Study and Tradition Within Drama, and Monmouthshire Houses with Cyril Fox. So, yes. Let's see. He was the source of various controversies over the course of his life. In 1938, he declared his wish to give up his job at the Ministry of Information on the grounds that he was not doing enough work to justify his salary. In 1958, he agitated Welsh nationalist feelings by declaring Welsh a moribund language. Demands were made for his resignation from the National Museum of Wales, but he stood fast. The motto of the Raglan barony is Mutare vel timere sperno. I scorn to change or to fear. He died on the 14th of September 1964. So there we go. A little bit about Lady Raglan beneath there. And what have we got on his book here? Just to read it from Wikipedia. Lord Raglan's work, The Hero, Study and Tradition Within Drama, published in 1936. The book's central thesis is that the hero figures of mythology have their origin in ritual drama, not historical fact. In the book's most influential chapter, he outlines 22 common traits of god heroes, which he calls the mythic hero archetype. Raglan then encapsulates the lives of several heroes and awards points or marks for thematic elements for a possible score of 22. He dissects Oedipus, Theseus, Romulus, Heracles, Perseus, Jason, Bellerophon, Pelops, Asclepius, Dionysus, Apollo, Zeus, Joseph, Moses, Elijah, Watu Gunnan, Niai Kang, Sigurd, Siegfried, Lou Lugus, Arthur, and Robin Hood. Oedipus earns the highest score with 21 marks. The pattern has been applied to other heroes, including Beowulf and Harry Potter. Let me see. 15. Prescribes laws, but that's the one that's missing from Oedipus. I would have that in there probably. So Oedipus scores 21 out of 22, but he should be probably 22. He significantly excluded Jesus from the study, even though Jesus matched a number of the identified traits. He claimed to have omitted Jesus to avoid conflict with his publisher. An outspoken atheist and active humanist in the 1960s, Raglan was among the MPs and peers who established the all-party parliamentary humanist group in the British Parliament. He's a member of the British Humanist Association, serving on its advisory council. So that's a little bit about Lord Raglan. English aristocracy out of the military. One of those. Not a bad wee book nonetheless, but he's badly wrong in quite a lot of things, I think. So we'll get reading in a wee minute or two, folks. Let me just catch up with your comments there. Julian said National Lampoon staff are involved into SNL during the 1970s, I believe. Oh, right, I did not know that. Christopher Crowley said, good night, Doc. It's Christopher off. Good night, Christopher. Sorry, or if you just arrived, saying good night, then hello. Not too sure, but otherwise, take it easy, Christopher. Jen said, recently chatted with someone about the Raglan hero cycle in relation to Prince Arjuna in the Gita. Super knowledgeable. Oh, very good. Some Joycean scholars have also compared the hero cycle to permutations of heroism in Leopold Bloom. To some scholars, this myth ritual pervades not just storytelling and deification of personalities, it is within the essential evolution of language and unconscious. Yes. But at the same time, a lot of this stuff it's a systemic attempt to understand, or to sort of say that myths are all, they're archetypal, etc. That they all have this basis, and I don't always agree with it. The ritual, well, I suppose the steps generally where you're saying, oh, here's a kind of system that all of our heroes should fall into, and then we come up with a wee scoring system that they don't fall into all of these things. We can see the distinct differences, But yeah, language, the essential evolution of language in the unconscious. Language is a big part of it, I think, Joe. Especially in relation to myths and rituals and things and so on. But yeah, I mean, if you start reading through this, it's just in terms of there are some ideas here. He doesn't like classicists, for example, and I don't think he likes any kind of euhemerist kind of point of view as well. It's a bit of name dropping at the start, but what we'll do is we'll read his little thing here on the basis of history. Is where he starts off with. That's kind of where I disagree on him a fair bit. But the main bit that we will read, hopefully it won't be too long. Pardon me. This again, this is just it seems that this book isn't that easily available. Is the in relation to what we're looking at in Children of Dune is the myth and ritual, which is a multi-chapter thing that ends with that hero with the list of all the different attributes of the hero, and the one that we're particularly interested in with Dune, the one that's overlaid onto Paul Atreides is the Oedipus myth. I think when I did it, I think he scored 19 out of the 22 steps. I really should have scribbled on this high one. Oh well, he gives us at the bottom of each. Well, who else gets 19? Dionysus gets 19 points. Not too many. Theseus gets 20. Romulus gets 18. Heracles gets 17. Perseus gets 18. It's, I don't know, this kind of thing does really, I think, in many ways detracts from the very individual cultural aspects of heroic myths and stuff like this. It almost breaks it down to once he gets through his little discussion about something like playing top trumps. That's the way I look at it, to be honest with you. You know, let's have a, we'll start off with, now this is from the first part. I suppose the book is broken into three different sections. Part one is on tradition, part two is myth, and part three is drama. And we're mostly concerned with part two, but we're going to read this little bit for the basis of history, which I think is where he sets up some of his problems. But just give you an idea of the man. The one thing I will say to you is this: is that Lord Raglan is a British soldier, a product of Aiken, sorry, I'll rephrase that. He's an English soldier, a product of Eton and Sandhurst, and his property and his, sorry, you know the type. I'm sure he is in himself an archetype, I think, or part of an archetype of the landed gentry, the landed noble. Who's a bit of a hobbyist, and that's the way I would take him in this case, And he does make plenty of fair points, but take what he says with a pinch of salt. But let's have a wee look at it anyway. So this is to do with the basis of history. So this is what Lord Raglan has to say. Only the smallest fraction of the human race has ever acquired the habit of taking an objective view of the past. For most people, even most educated people, the past is merely a prologue to the present, not merely without interest insofar as it is independent of the present, but simply inconceivable, except in terms of the present. I've got the hiccups, that's a great start. The events of our own past life are remembered, not as they seem to us at the time, but merely as incidents leading up to our present situation. We cannot persuade ourselves, in fact, we make no attempt to do so, that undertakings which ended in failure or fiasco were entered upon with just as much forethought and optimism as those which have profoundly affected our lives. We suppose our beliefs and mental processes to have been ever the same as they now are, and regard the story of our lives not as a cross-country walk upon which we are still engaged, but as a path cut deliberately by fate and ourselves to the positions which we now occupy. In our consideration of the story of others, our minds work in the same way. We judge every event by its consequences and assume that those consequences must have seemed just as inevitable to those who took part in it as they do to ourselves. We find it difficult to believe that when the ship went down, those who were to be drowned felt just the same as those who were to be saved. We say that coming events cast their shadows before them, but what we really mean is that later events cast their shadows back over earlier ones. This lack of mental perspective, from which we all suffer, displays itself in the saying, "Call no man happy until he is dead," which implies that a few hours or days of pain or misfortune can outweigh long years of happiness and success. Very quickly, before we go any further, we say that coming events cast their shadows before them, but what we really mean is that later events cast their shadows back over earlier ones. I completely disagree with that statement. An absolute corker of a whole set of examples of that are the science fiction novels known as the Thames Valley disaster novels, one of which would be the War of the Worlds, are all kind of predicting war with Europe before it happens, based on extrapolating current affairs, let's say they're called Thames Valley disaster novels. They're kind of looking at how London, how England's going to deal with that. So it's an example of where he's wrong there. Very much so. All this is characteristic of our study of history. We regard the events of the reigns of Louis XV and Louis XVI as leading up inevitably to the French Revolution, though Voltaire and Gibbon saw no sign of an impending catastrophe. We regard Stonewall Jackson as having fought in a losing cause, though at the time of his death the Confederates were getting the best of it. In a word, even those of us who take a genuine interest in the facts of history tend, either by our mental limitations or the defects of our education, to see them in a false perspective. Before discussing history any further, I ought to follow what should be a universal practice by defining the term. Okay, history then is the recital in chronological sequence of events which are known to have occurred. Without precise chronology, there can be no history, since the essence of history is the relation of events in their correct sequence. We might know something of the Battle of Marengo and something of the Battle of Waterloo, but we could not attempt to compose a history of Napoleon unless we knew which came first. That's fair enough, but that's not what history is at all. To recite a series of events in chronology is in no way history. Again, I'll go with it. History is an inquiry into events that occurred in the past. They do, for them to have meaning in relation to each other, they do need to be not necessarily sequential, but they do need to have a chronology. There need to be time markers, if you like, where we can relate things to. We don't necessarily have to have them, but they sure as hell help. But I don't agree with his definition of what history is here at all. Why do people study and transmit historical facts? It's a good question. It cannot be with the sole object of studying and transmitting historical facts. Educated people study history for a variety of reasons because they hope to find it in an explanation of the present and an indication of the future, because their curiosity is aroused by survivals from the past, because the classics were long regarded as the source of all knowledge, and a knowledge of the classics involves some knowledge of history, because the Bible and other religious works contain historical references, because they get a living by it, because for these and possibly for other reasons, some knowledge of history has come to be regarded as part of the mental equipment of an educated person. Our interest in history is, however, inseparable from books. It is very remarkable that our dependence upon books is so little realized, even by teachers and writers who live by books. An illiterate person, if he were interested in history, could learn it only from the lips of an historian, or from a person who could read a history book to him, and if he forgot a fact, he could regain it only by having recourse to his teacher. I can think of other ways a person can encounter history. The amount of historical knowledge that he could acquire would be limited by the fact that he would have no means of tabulating or classifying it, and could therefore have no idea of chronology outside the very limited range of his own experience. All history depends, as I have said, upon chronology, and no real idea of chronology can be obtained except by seeing facts tabulated in chronological sequence. Within kind of an oral tradition, storytelling tradition, you can give a sense of distance, time very easily enough, and particularly within fairy tales and things like that are necessarily aimed at children. You don't have to overly complicate these things, but once upon a time is a good thing, or in a long, long time ago, these kind of things. There's all sorts of ways of dealing with that. Once in a different era, once in a different age of man, all of these kind of things. And the problem, I suppose, from Raglan's point of view, is we haven't always had chronologies for the things that we've studied and learned about. For example, from the classical world, we haven't always been able to kind of line things up. The more we learn, the more we find out, the more we discover about the past. The history is fluid. As I said, it's constantly changing, because the more we know, the better informed we are. It changes our picture of the past. Pardon me. This was brought home to me when I was showing my 5-year-old son around the amphitheatre at Caerleon and telling him something of the Romans in Britain. He looked rather puzzled and asked, "Were you there then, Daddy, when we read of the Irish blacksmith who said that his smithy was much older than the local dolman? It was there in his grandfather's time, and he died a very old man. Or of the English rustic who said that the parish church, 13th century, was very old indeed. It was there before he came to the parish, and that was over 40 years ago. We are apt to suppose the speakers exceptionally stupid or ignorant, but their attitude towards the past is similar to that of the Australian black, who began a story with, 'Long, long ago, when my mother was a baby, the sun shone all day and all night,' and is the inevitable result of illiteracy." I warned you. This is just for anybody turning in. This is the work of Lord Raglan, English Lord and Peer, if you like. Was he Peer? He's Lord, I suppose. Yeah. So there we go. In relation, and we have these in quotes, by the way. The past is similar to that of the Australian black. He's talking about the Aboriginal peoples of Australia, the indigenous peoples there, who began a story with, and this is the bit that's in quotation, long, long ago when my mother was a baby, this is all in quotations, the sun shone all day and all night. That is the 11th, so that's a quotation from, is that from Folklore, page 14, chapter 14, page 233. What's the book? Let me just see. Have we got that? Bibliography. Oh goodness, this is an old-fashioned way of. Did you give me the author's name? No, you didn't. You feigned. So it's not bad, but. That doesn't even look the set of books that he's referencing here. It's a decent enough bibliography. No, I'll never find that in there. I'll have to go and look looking. Pardon me. It would be almost impossible to make an illiterate person realize that the date AD 1600 had any meaning at all. Calendar sticks are used by tribes of both Africa and America to keep a record of events within living memory, but there is no means by which such a record could be preserved longer. Bundles of sticks convey nothing except to those who tie them together, and if you were to tell your illiterate that a stick represented a year and then count out 335 sticks, he would be little the wiser. And if you were to tell him that Queen Elizabeth and Shakespeare both lived then, he would find it difficult to believe you, since if Shakespeare were really connected with some ancient monarch, which since a play of his was performed quite recently, seems highly improbable, it should be King Lear, whom he tells us all about, rather than Queen Elizabeth, whom he hardly mentions. Oh dear. Lear's an Irish king, by the way. The fact that chronology depends upon reading and writing seems quite unknown to historians. Thus, according to Professor Chambers, this is R.W. Chambers, who authored England Before the Norman Conquest, it is probable that even in heathen times, despite the absence of written records, the succession of monarchs and the length of their reigns may have been committed to memory with considerable exactness. It's interesting that we're talking about this thing and that we use the word heathen times. That phrase there, what the hell's that? Yet he suggested no motive for committing such facts to memory, nor any possible machinery for transmitting them, and he asked us to believe that the Anglo-Saxons of the settlement had conceptions of chronology which were quite foreign to their descendants, even 1,000 years later. The editor of the Passed On Letters tells us that the mode in which the letters are dated by their writers showed clearly that our ancestors were accustomed to measure the lapse of time by very different standards from those now in use. Whether men in general were acquainted with the current year of the Christian era may be doubted. That was an ecclesiastical computation rather than one for use in common life. They seldom dated their letters by the year at all, and when they did it was not by the year of our Lord, but by the year of the king's reign. Chronicles and annals of the period which give the year of our Lord are almost always full of inaccuracies in the figures, and altogether it is evident that an exact computation of years was a thing for which there was considered to be little practical use. That the exactness of chronology which Professor Chambers postulates for the illiterate Saxons of the 5th century was quite foreign to the literate English of the 15th, indicates that his postulates is nothing more than an ill-considered guess. Illiterate Saxons of the 5th century. The English illiterates have in fact no sense of chronology at all, has been noted by several writers. The folk have no sense of history, says Mr. Fox, Strangeways. There would be nothing improbable to them in St. George meeting Napoleon in the same ballad. Sir E.K. Chambers tells us that in the minor Cornwall folk play, the battles of Agincourt and Quebec and the capture of Portobello by Vernon in 1739 have all been mixed up together. There is another characteristic of the folk play, says Mr. Tiddy, which has an interesting connection with unpopular tastes. The absence of any historic sense cannot be passed over. For us, it is quite impossible to realize the state of mind to which a century, let alone 500 years, means nothing at all. And yet that is the normal condition even of the majority of those who've been subjected to the modern elementary education. Thanks to this state of mind, our village ancestors a century ago could pit St. George against Bonaparte, without the least sense of incongruity. And even without the evidence of Chaucer, we should have good reason to believe that our ancestors of the Middle Ages were liable to the same kind of absurdity. To the folk, it might almost be said 1,000 years are but as yesterday. These plays are acted and ballads recited by members of what is at any rate a semi-literate community. The ideas of St. George and of Agincourt, if not derived originally from books, have certainly been reinforced by book learning. In a semi-literate community of all the members, including the illiterate, not merely benefit from the existence of books, but learn to understand something of the meaning and purpose of books and written records generally. In totally illiterate communities, however, such as still exists in Central Africa or Northern Australia, the whole structure of society is based upon a system for which reading and writing are completely absent, so that the purpose of writing is not merely unknown, but is totally inconceivable. And since the purpose of writing is inconceivable, the idea of any form of knowledge which might be preserved by writing is also inconceivable. Forms of knowledge which depend even in part upon written record can have for the savage no existence at all. Since history depends upon written chronology and the savage has no written chronology, the savage can have no history. And since interest in the past is induced solely by books, the savage can take no interest in the past. The events of the past are, in fact, completely lost. We shall realize this fact better if we consider how soon the past is lost among ourselves whenever it is not recalled to us by books. How many women of today know, for example, what is meant by sprunking, a palatine, or a farthingale? Yet it is not a great many years since these words were as unfamiliar as the word jumper is now. Even the most familiar facts are soon forgotten. In the Neolithic age, polished stone axes were made by the thousand, but soon after they were superseded by the introduction of metal. All knowledge of them was lost, and for a few centuries later it had come to be believed that anyone who happened to find one had come upon a thunderbolt. When, therefore, we attribute to the savage an interest in the past comparable to our interest in the history of England, we are attributing to him a taste which he could not possibly possess, and which, if he did not possess, he could not possibly gratify. The savage, again, has far less than we have to remind him of the past. There may be ancient ruins, but since he has no means, even if he had the wish to learn their history, he contents himself with attributing to them a supernatural origin, by which he means little more than that they must have been made by people whose customs were unnatural, since they were different from his own. He thinks about them to this extent if they thrust themselves upon his notice, but if they have no use, they have no real interest. This attitude of most Europeans to relics of the past is very much the same. So yeah, let me see. You're getting the gist of it, I think. Let me see if we can cut through some of that. Most illiterate communities have, of course, traditional stories. This is the section. And these stories may seem to be memories of historical events. They tell of the journeys and victories of heroes, and with some rationalization and rearrangement, these journeys and victories can be made to represent historical migrations and conquests. These stories, however, are really myths. What a myth is, we shall consider later. Here I may note that according to Van Gennep, the writer whom I have just cited, the leading heroes of French tradition are not Charlemagne and his successors on the throne, but Roland, Gargantua, and the Little Red Man. Roland is the paladin from the Song of Roland, fights the rearguard defense, isn't it? Durandal's his sword, I think. Gargantua is a giant from Rabelais. I've got a copy of it, actually. Somewhere. Gargantua and Pantagruel, which is, I suppose, it's sort of literature and kind of in the vein of Chaucer, I would imagine. But goodness, where would that be? Which were giants, by the way, Gargantua and Pantagruel. That's a book. Goodness. I would have to actually think where I would have that book. Another one. Just bear with me a second. Sure, I have a copy. There you go. Oh. Rabelais, Gargantua and Pantagruel. There we go. Unique among world literature for its robust exuberance and monstrous exaggeration. Rabelais, 1494 to 1553, a monk who qualified as a Bachelor of Medicine, was persecuted by both religious and civil authorities for its publication. As he chronicles the fantastic adventures of the two giants, a series of caricatures emerges depicting the church hierarchy, schools and universities, theologians, lawyers, and philosophers. The impression received is of the conflict of two ages overlapping, the new age of humanism, research, and individualism, and the former one of the fixed world order of the schoolmen. Chunky, you read that. There we go. It's in 4 different books, isn't it? I think. Hang on. I haven't looked at this since, oh goodness, over 30 years. Books are pretty good, Nick. First book, Genealogy and Antiquity of Gargantua. Book second, On the Origin and Antiquity of the Great Pantagruel. Book third, Pantagruel transported a colony of utopians into Dipsodia. Fourth book, How Pantagruel put to sea to visit the Oracle, the Holy Backfuck. Is that it? 4. Oh no, there's 5 books. I do apologize. The 5th and last book, How Pantagruel arrived at Ringing Island under the noise we heard. 5 books of Rabelais, Gargantua and Pantagruel. If you're into your Chaucer, that kind of thing, if you haven't heard of this, that might interest you. Or Gulliver's Travels, that kind of thing. Satire, isn't it? O'Neill influence there. To some, is that O'Neill from that? Oh, I'll jump back. Sorry, I just got the last comment there. Object degree. Is that a reference to the White Plague? No, I can tell you all about King Lear if you like, but it is the Irish King Lear. Lir is the English King Lear. Shakespeare commissions 2 plays. Has 2 plays commissioned to connect genealogies to the current king, which is James I, James VI, isn't it? The 2 plays are Macbeth and King Lear. Macbeth connect because he's King of Scotland, King of England. So Macbeth connects him to Banquo genealogically as an ancestor, and King Lear connects him to Lear, therefore also to Brutus, which connects him. It's to do with the fictional king list of Britain, and therefore that connects. Oddly enough, for a Christian king, connects him to be a direct ancestor of Aeneas from the Aeneid, which therefore makes him an ancestor of Zeus. It's a thing that's done in literature. Caesar has it done. Augustus has it done with the Aeneid for the same reason, to show that he is an ancestor of Aeneas and therefore an ancestor of Zeus. So sorry, let me just run back there and just check the comments. Prince Arjun and the Bhagavad Gita, I haven't read it. I'd really like to read it, Julian. Some Joycean scholars have also compared the hero cycle to the permutations of heroism and Leopold Bloom. It's because he's the kind of, there's an overprint of the Odyssey in there. I just watched recently, folks. I just watched The Return with Ralph Fiennes as Odysseus. I quite enjoyed it. It's the very, very last bit of the Odyssey. I thought it was pretty good, actually. Don't know if anybody's seen it. It was a couple of hours long. First film like that I've sat down and watched, kind of late night. So if anyone's not checked it out, it's quite a recent version. As I said, it's really literally from where Odysseus arrives home. I think it runs from the story there. And I thought it was pretty good. There's a few liberties taken with it, but on the whole, not too bad. To some scholars, this myth ritual pervades not just storytelling and deification of personalities, is within the essential evolution of language and consciousness. And Lear Irish and O'Neill influence there. Yeah, King Lear is the same. The King Lear from the Shakespeare play is the same Lear as as in the Children of Lear, etc., etc. But spelled L-I-R in Irish, isn't it? Ancient Irish sea god. There, what's his full? Manon MacLear. That's him. As the eponymous king of the children of Lear. It's to do with the matter of Britain, basically, the connection there. And the matter of Britain has a fictional king list. It's not a real king list, but it shows that the kings of Britain are descended from those who came from Troy, basically. And there's a history of this within literature, object group, of stories that are written to connect genealogies of a monarch. So Aeneas is the leader of the refugees who escaped from Troy, carrying his father, who carries the palladium and the sword of Troy. And one of the founding myths of Rome is that he goes on to find Rome. So Augustus has Virgil write the Aeneid, which is only 12 books. By the way, it's unfinished, but that's its purpose, is to create another, basically the equivalent of a Homeric epic for Rome, a national epic, and connect the Julii, I think, basically to this family. So that's the part of that, yeah. But it's done with a Macbeth's the same thing as well. There's a lot to do with it, witchcraft and women being on the throne prior to this, all sorts of it's there's a lot to those two plays. There we go. I was just wondering who's the little red man though. That's why I quickly said who Roland was and Gargantua was. I don't know the little red man. That's something I've not heard of. Napoleon's Red Man come from Irish reference to Little Red Men story, referring to Napoleon pamphlets published after his exile in Elba. Something to do with the Little Red Man of Destiny. Sounds like a piece of propaganda by the looks of it. Let's see. On we go with his bizarre. Let's see. If illiterate people really took an interest in the events of the past, we should expect to find that when people begin to write, they would soon begin to make records of past events. So far, however, in this form being the case, that it is doubtful whether the ancient inhabitants of Egypt and Mesopotamia had any history at all in our sense of the term. Such records of fact were kept seem to have been merely by the byproduct of a system of drawing up elaborate calendars for the purpose of ritual. Religious and magical factors, says Dr. S.A. Cook, have also been prominent in the rise of history writing, and Mesopotamian astrological tablets record for the warning of all concerned portents, signs, and catastrophes. Kings may have recorded their victories as a charm to secure further success. At any rate, they seem never to have recorded the victories of their predecessors. That's not true. In the Egypt of Herodotus' time, there seemed to have been no corpus of recognized history at all. The discrepant tales which the priests told him were almost entirely mythical, and the only fact upon which they were agreed was that the Egyptians had invented the calendar. See Herodotus 2:4. Most of Herodotus is myth. I believe that he has a good claim to the title of Father of History, since I can find no evidence that before his time the idea of history had ever occurred to anyone. The history of Herodotus was defective because his materials were inadequate. We often get Herodotus considered the father of all lies and so on. There's a fair bit to Herodotus. I think he's rightly considered the father of history. I understand there's other historians before him in other cultures. I think China has historians. That's out of curiosity. Yeah, it's just, it's bringing him up pretty much. Not going to give me anyone else. Generally within classical studies, if you're looking at these guys, you would tend to study Herodotus, and you would study him, and you would study the guy that comes after him, who's quite critical of his Thucydides. So you study Herodotus' histories if you want a good wee run on the Greek kind of history stuff. Then you would study Thucydides. His book is The History of the Peloponnesian War, which is a good read. And then you've got, well, what else would we do? We would do the Anabasis with that, which is Xenophon's record of a rather famous march up country. All of which are good reads, by the way. I was piling through Herodotus a wee while back, actually, and I got stopped. I'll just put it down for a wee bit, but I'll have to come back to it. But I was enjoying reading it. Yeah. And there are myths in Herodotus that are kind of that are lined up to historical events. Most of Herodotus is myth, but I believe there is a good claim to the title of Father of History. It is that the myths come out of real events, I think, you see. He says, I can find no evidence that before this time the idea of history had ever occurred to anyone. The history of Herodotus was defective because his materials were inadequate. Let us now consider what materials of history are. Okay, in the first class we have placed written accounts at the times by persons who were present at the events when they describe letters, dispatches, reports, diaries, memoranda. He really is. He's got a real thing for the written word here, hasn't he? So he goes off on a fair bit here. Second class eyewitnesses. Third class, he puts archaeological evidence. Fourth class, accounts written by people who obtained their information from actors or spectators shortly after the event. Fifth class, accounts obtained by questioning people as to what happened a long time before, or accounts obtained at second or third hand. He says it should be quite clear that the first four classes are in varying degree the only genuine sources of history. Fifth class may be useful for reconciling discrepancies or filling in details, but would not be accepted as primary authority for a fact otherwise unknown. So a lot of how historians work today is actually not very different from how Herodotus worked. And yes, he's got a limited amount of resources, I suppose, but yeah, he understands primary, secondary, and tertiary sources, for example. To do second-hand evidence is not accepted in the court of law because it is notoriously unreliable. It may be accepted by historians, but only if it's given by persons especially well placed or well qualified to obtain the facts. Nobody would accept a fact on fourth-hand evidence alone, yet that is what tradition supposedly is to be historical as at best. Now, this is still to do with tradition and history, but it may be said tradition is quite different. You're speaking of events which are known only to a few people, but tradition is what's known to the whole community. Tradition certainly is known to the whole community, but historical facts are known to the whole community. How many people know at first or even at third hand what blows the hero struck in the battle, what the queen said to the king, or what passed between the conspirators? Very few indeed, and the fact that a rumour went through the crowd has no evidential value whatever. A garbled account becomes more garbled every time it is repeated. The loss of a battle or the destruction of a city may be known to many, and if tradition were wholly or even chiefly made up of such incidents, it might be possible to make out a case for regarding it as founded upon fact. Such incidents, however, play but a small part in tradition, which consists chiefly of incidents in the lives of kings, queens, and heroes. Now, the stories of court life which get abroad today are always inaccurate and often quite untrue, and we have no reason to believe that things were different 1,000 or 5,000 years ago. It is tedious to continue with generalities, so let us take a concrete case, that of King Alfred and the cakes. Okay, supposing it to have been a true story, how could it have become public property? Even if the old woman had dared to whisper it to her cronies, they would not have believed her, and the king would never have recounted a story which would have exposed him to ridicule and lowered the prestige upon which his success depended. This story is really a myth which seems to have been first attached to King Alfred in the 12th century. So for those of us who are not familiar, let me bring it up here. King Alfred and the cakes. Right. Burning the cakes, isn't it? Let's see. That's not quite what I was after. I've got here Daldenia concentrica, which is a The inedible fungus Daldenia concentrica is known by several common names, including King Alfred's cake and crab balls. Let's see. King Alfred. Okay, this is from King Alfred blog from a companion to a news book on King Alfred by Dr. Paul Kelly, PhD. King Alfred, a Man on the Move, it's called. And he says, I honestly don't believe he burned the cakes. Let's see. When talking to people, it's often the first thing that comes up. It first appears in the anonymous Vita S. Neoti, The Life of St. Neot, which seems to have been put together in the late 10th century, where it states that the burning of the cakes took place at Athelney, King Alfred's refuge in the Somerset levels, prior to his successful reconquest of his kingdom that took place after his victory over the Vikings at the Battle of Effington in 870 AD. The story of King Alfred burning cakes found its way from the Vita S. Neoti into a 12th century compilation of documents that became known as the Annals of St. Neots. Then in the 16th century, it got lifted from the Annals of St. Neots and inserted by the theologian Matthew Parker into his copy of Asser's Life of King Alfred. Because the writings of Asser must have been viewed as a serious historical source, this must have given the story a real boost and is probably why it is so famous today. We cannot ultimately prove that it was inserted by Matthew Parker as opposed to somebody before him doing it, because the Life of King Alfred that we would have been working from was destroyed in a fire in 1731, and there are no known surviving ancient copies. The result, nonetheless, was that for a significant period of time, the story of the cakes was treated as an integral part of the writings of Asser, when this in fact was not the case. So here's the tale. For those of you who don't know, in brief, the earliest version of the story tells us that Alfred turned up on his own at a pig farmer's swineherd. Was changed in. Hang on a second. That doesn't make sense. In brief, the earliest version of the story tells us that Alfred turned up on his own at a pig farmer's cottage. Right. Sorry. The bracket here it says suboculus swineherd was changed in the annals to Uaculus cowherd for reasons unknown. Right. Let's just read that again. Sorry. Annoying set of brackets there. In brief, the earliest version of the story tells us that Alfred turned up on his own at a pig farmer's cottage on Athelney, where he was taken in and stayed for some days whilst he awaited God's mercy, and keeping in mind the patience that had been demonstrated by the biblical Job. One day, while the pig farmer was taking his pigs to a field, the farmer's wife started baking loaves of bread, not cakes, but then became occupied with other domestic duties. The loaves started to burn, and the wife pointed out to Alfred that although he was quite happy to eat them, he hadn't been so keen to turn them over when he could see that they were burning. It appears that Alfred was shaken but not stirred, and he proceeded to turn the loaves over. The tale about King Alfred burning cakes was recast many times subsequently, and I suspect a whole book could be written tracing these variations. There you go. I don't see why that it would have done him any real harm at all. He eventually turned the cakes over, didn't he? He saved them in the end. Could have demonstrated that he was a practical king, you know. That's very interesting just to read that based upon what we've just heard in this book. Even if, yeah. 3K Chambers tells us that in such tales, the names are the least permanent feature. He instances the story of how a horseman leaped over Bodrugan Head in Cornwall to escape from his pursuers. This story was once told of Tristram, later of Sir Bors, and had recently been transferred to one Henry of Bodrugan, who took the wrong side at Bosworth. The lapse of folk memory, he says, is as characteristic as it is tenacity. When I passed Athelney last year, a Glastonbury car driver called my attention to a farmhouse in which Arthur burnt the cakes. I shall discuss folk memory presently. So it's King Arthur getting blamed for them as opposed to King Alfred. Goodness gracious. Now we get some of this. I suppose. Oh goodness, how long is this? We're not too far off the first chapter. We'll just keep going. Oh, let the man set out his stall. I shall discuss folk memory presently. Let us first consider the question of how long an incident which is not recorded in writing can be remembered. After much consideration, I have fixed on the term of 150 years as the maximum. Why? I have arrived at this figure, which is of course approximate in various ways. A careful study of what is known of my grandparents and great grandparents has convinced me that any fact about a person which is not placed on record within 100 years of his death is lost. Giving a person about 50 years of active life, we get 150 years as the limit. Um, there you go. That's a bit different lifespans back then. Among ourselves, the name of the dead are recorded in various ways, but I believe that among the illiterate, anyone who's been dead 100 years is completely forgotten. Fair enough. Not necessary, but again, I have known cases in which old men have succeeded in impressing incidents of their own lives upon children in such a way that the children remember them, but they cannot impress in this way incidents which have not made an impression upon themselves. Matter that is not part of the group tradition thus dies out in the second generation. A study of the facts which survive and of the processes by which facts are transmitted gives a maximum period of about 150 years in both cases. A very good example of that what he's talking about that proves that he's completely wrong is the Orange Order in Northern Ireland, which must be what, probably at least 300. How old would they be? Probably about 300 years old. With a bit of all sorts of things going on here. Burning of an ancient flag got burnt in this country very recently as part of a bit of a tit for tat, a bit of a retaliation for a bunch of who were they? Was it the Apprentice boys pissing all over people's walls? But there's traditions that are running there, you know. Um, and he's also discussing the illiterate. And I'm not talking about people in Northern Ireland today, but illiteracy would have been a huge thing in this country. Those traditions, those that he's discussing, that he's fixed his pattern on, are alive and well today in this country. And as much as that there are written aspects about it, in fact, the tradition here very much culturally is through flags, through banners, and through music and marching, if you see what I mean. But it's still very much a verbal, oral tradition in that sense, as well as being written these days. That's just one example from my own from my own country. I got to stop saying that, not from my own culture. That proves this isn't the case, really. Again, I have known cases in which old men have succeeded in impressing incidents of their lives upon children in such a way that the children remember them, but they cannot impress them in this way incidents which have not made an impression upon themselves. Matter that is not part of this group's tradition thus dies out in the second generation. A study of the facts which survive and of the processes by which facts are transmitted gives a maximum period of about 150 years in both cases. This is easy enough to check in Europe. You didn't check it across the road. But among savages is very difficult because it is seldom that we have any idea of what we did take place over 150 years ago. I disagree. We often find, however, chiefs here are alleged to be about fifth in descent from culture heroes, and many mythical events here are alleged to have occurred about 150 years before they are narrated or first recorded. 150 years ago, or even less, we're in a period of the events of which have been completely forgotten and which is therefore available for the myths. These, being ageless, can be allotted to any period. Every incident begins to fade from the minds of both actors and spectators as soon as it has occurred. I don't think so. As long as some of them are alive, a record of the incident may be preserved in their subconscious minds, even if they do not consciously remember it. Of this we cannot be certain, but what is quite certain is that facts cannot be transmitted from one person to another by means of the subconscious mind. The only facts which I can transmit to my children, writing apart, are those of which I am conscious. These require an effort on my part to transmit and a greater effort on my children's part to remember. I disagree with that as well. Conceit may lead me to transmit to my children, probably in not quite accurate form, certain selected incidents from my own career, but what inducement have my children to remember them and pass them on? And if people do not, as in fact they usually do not, take the trouble to preserve facts about their own immediate relatives, why should they take so much trouble about more remote persons? The only writer in tradition who has attempted to answer this question is, so far as I can learn, Professor Chadwick, who says, the existence of a poem or story which deals with reminiscences of tribal conflicts necessarily presupposes an absorbing interest in tribal history. He goes on to suggest that this interest could be due only to patriotism, but fails to realize that ardent patriots are notoriously indifferent to historical facts. Any fable which gratifies their national pride is history to them. Professor Chadwick then does not take us very far in our search for an answer, but none of the other writers whom I have consulted attempt to deal with the question at all. They seem to assume that the details of battles and floods, court intrigues, and even domestic conversations transmit themselves down the ages quite independently of human effort or even of human volition. They achieve this, it would seem, by the aid of a mysterious agency, which E.K. Chambers, as we have seen, calls folk memory. The same term is used by Professor J.L. Myers, while Professor T.H. Robinson calls it race memory. He tells us that the story of the flood, as it stands in Genesis, is a race memory of a remote historical event. Similarly, Professor Gordon Childe assures us that the ancient Sumerian creation legend, wherein order is conjured out of the primeval chaos by the separation of land from water, preserves a vivid recollection of the tasks imposed upon the first colonists. Pardon me. Professor Childe can hardly suppose that the writers of the legend had seen in real life anything like what the legend describes. And if they had not seen it, how could they preserve a vivid recollection of it? Such terms seem to me to be quite meaningless. A memory is an individual possession just as much as a hand. I can pass on what is held in my memory as well as what is held in my hand, but my memory itself dies with me. Such terms as race memory and folk memory suggest that there exists in every illiterate community something analogous to our public record office, and obscures the fact that every unwritten tradition must be transmitted by conscious individual effort at least once in each generation. Professor Hocard, it seems to me, falls into a similar error when he says diversity of origin is, in my experience, one of the most tenacious memories a people can have. If foreigners come and settle, whether peacefully or by conquest, among another people, they will remember that, if nothing else, even decayed rustics living a precarious existence on the edge of the jungle remember that long ago the people in the next hamlet came from overseas under 7 princes. Yet all difference of language and custom has vanished. It is easy to show that such migrations, when they are real and not mythical, are soon forgotten. In the 9th and 10th centuries, many thousands of Danes settled in Yorkshire, Lincolnshire, and other counties of northeast England, and the inhabitants of those counties must be largely of Danish descent. Yet, far from recognizing this descent, they regard the Danes as enemies, who came to plunder and then sailed away. In the 11th century, a great part of Lancashire and Cumberland was settled by Norwegians, and Norwegian was for long the language of that area. Yet the fact is known only to students of history. In the 16th, there was a large influx of Protestant Flemings into southeastern England. They anglicised their names, and within a couple of generations were absorbed into the population. The rapidity with which historical events are forgotten shows how unlikely it is that it is remembered in the form of tradition should be history. I shall now proceed to examine various types of tradition, real or so-called, and shall show that whenever they can be tested, their lack of historicity becomes apparent. So that's the opening chapter of the basis of history from Lord Raglan. And as you can see there, we've got some interest and concern with folk memory and with race memory. and a lot of name dropping there. He's kind of right, of course. The English often fail to forget that they're Anglo-Saxons, they're Romans. Plenty of Romans in England prior to all of that turning up. The indigenous peoples that were here, then the Normans turn up. The Norwegians. The English are a really good mix of all sorts of people. Very interesting to hear what they're sort of saying about invasions and absorption into populations. Ireland has a similar thing with its mythology and history, and its mythology certainly seems to line up with the kind of historical fact that Ireland has been invaded many times, and its invaders are often assimilated into the culture. Where you notice that predominantly, I suppose, certainly within architecture and buildings and so on. In Northern Ireland, the Normans and their castles and churches. Carrickfergus is a wonderful example of that. But you get the arrival. You start to get hybrid names as well, I think, which is interesting. So that's the first chapter. As I said, we're talking about Lord Raglan, product of Empire. He's again the blacks and the savages. That you can hear him talking about, again, makes you go, okay, but he's a product of his times, and he's also very much English aristocracy. The joke, the aristocrats, anyway, so you get the idea. He's an articulate enough so-and-so, isn't he? And this is the interesting thing. I'll check your comments now, folks. Is that there's a fair amount of this kind of being discussed at the time, I think. He's hopping onto the conversation, but he's articulating some questions which are kind of useful. And if you do kind of run the problems with some of this stuff, you can tend to find exceptions to his rules and things like that. And I'm going to set 150-year limits. That's it. I'm no. So this chapter really piles into tradition, I suppose, going with the Normans, Anglo-Saxons, the next chapter. And I don't have really time to get through the whole. We'd end up reading the whole book, I suppose. Rather interesting, local tradition, etc. He's got some stuff on the Greeks in here. Just to kind of summarize, but I get the sense that Lord Raglan doesn't like classicists too much. I also get the sense that specifically he doesn't like here we go. Hang on. Did I open it just at the right page? Just to give you this. He doesn't like euhemerists much either. I'll read that in a second. I'm going to get some fluids here. Yeah. He split the book. Julian saying it's hard to see what Raglan is getting at. Between the oral and tradition and the written, he makes obtuse distinctions. He doesn't see the subtleties of the oral. Yeah, it's a focus, really. It's almost an anal focus on the written word with Raglan, and a desire to explain. I mean, my background, I would say, this begins with the archaeological evidence. Boom. I'll stand up to Raglan and I'll start there. He seems to place archaeological evidence rather far down the list. And the problem, as we know, obviously, is that writing only goes back so far. But stories, in particular, within archaeological evidence, predate writing by tens, possibly hundreds of thousands of years. We start to get into cave paintings and stuff, which are forms, sequential art. Modern day, you would call it a comic book, for want of a better term. But what you have is art on structures, even if it's just a cave wall that's preserved and preserves a narrative, which is a language without words, without written words. And the written word is incredibly important to human development. I think the written word is I've said this before, Julian. The number one, what's the most beneficial and most dangerous technology that humanity has invented? It's the written word. and its new evolution will be AI. That's still all based on the written word, isn't it? Mm. Yes, he does. It's from a different era, Julian, isn't it? I mean, you can see why, he's been, I read this when I was before I finished school. Actually, I've had this book a long, long time. Yeah, it's secondhand. It's an old library book. It's originally come from Dorset County Library. I'm gonna stop doing that every time I hear Dorset. Apologies to anybody in Dorset, but I've had this for donkeys. So back when I was a kid, reading kind of Lord of the Rings and all that stuff, I'm very much into heroes. Always have been. Fascinated by heroes and what they get up to. And so little books like this on the hero, actually owning this book became incredibly useful to me many, many years later. You know, pardon me, but yes, indeed, he's a bit random on something. And as I said, oral tradition. As you say, oral tradition was an established part of the ancient world. In the colonial eras, literacy became a mark of status. Literate English and Scots and literate Irish is a stereotype. Yes, indeed. As I said, you can, as much as I'll not duck reading somebody else's words. If we were talking about this recently, Julian was the what do you call it? Horace and the translator of Horace. And it's interesting, something I've always had a lot of respect for Penguin Classics, and particularly the original Penguin Classics, under the editorship of the great E.V. Rue. E.V. Rue stuff I adore, actually, but him being the editor, we've got some nasty slips, haven't we? And you kind of go, who are they? In some cases, not like this quite with Lord Raglan, I suppose, but you kind of go, who's translating this and why? And you start to look, oh, here, Junior here is a product of British Empire. He's a ha ha ha. He's a Lord ha ha. I was probably using the wrong Lord ha the wrong, but ha 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 ha. Upper class twit of the year. That's it. That's kind of where we go. I'm sure you know the Monty Python sketch. Raglan's could be popped into that company here. I think, but certainly the recent we were talking about that particular poem of Horace's. I was actually going to read that out, and at the translation, I went, I'm not reading this out, and I did not. I went and translated it myself, Julie, and I was just, what the hell's this? And then I thought, I've got to check my work against other translators, which I did, and yeah, the use of the N word in that translation of that poem was just weird. Where'd you get that from? The translator is the answer. But yeah, it's kind of almost made me think about translators for Penguin Classics from the golden age, if you like, of Penguin Classics. What sort of stuff they get through, especially when it's the classics basically is the study of the Greek and Roman classical civilizations, two civilizations. They go from kingdoms to democracies, pretty much to empires, to fallen empires. But there's a bit of it. There's a whiff of empire about Lord Raglan, isn't there? Goodness gracious! And what is maybe he's hoping what he's saying there, Julian, is that we don't remember his ancestor. So the person who wrote this is his famous ancestor. That I think he's the fourth. I would put Baron Raglan. Is that correct? The ancestor that's the charge of the Light Brigade guy is the first one. So I'm sure there's probably a modern Lord Raglan, peerage as well, that they've inherited this. Oh, sorry, the wee bit I was just going to read. I had that there. I opened it up at the right page. But that's the basis of history. Him attempting to say what history is. So right off the bat, I'm in disagreement with him. I just the one bit that I really thought for the Dune fans, this is a book that's really important to Frank Herbert. Is the race memory ideas there, the folk memory. And then you had a Porky Pig, son of a baby moment there. So he goes on. This is the first part of the book is on tradition, I was just pointing out before I jump forward that the bit that we're concerned with is to do with myth and ritual, really. But in fact, I'm sure Frank knows this book, read this book quite well. Um, in fact, I really must have a good wee read through it again. Combination of independent tribal heroes into a single genealogical scheme in the Old Testament and ancient Greece and in Ireland, ancient Ireland. That's what we were looking for. So I was, just before I wanted to jump forward, I was just going to point out that he didn't. Lord Raglan doesn't like. So as an amateur anthropologist, for want of a better word, that and an English peer, yeah, I can also see. I think Frank doesn't like kind of that particular type of educational authority, does he either? Let me see. I'm not too sure if we've got. Anything on the classicists here, but this is his opinion on euhemerism coming up. It says the fictitious pedigrees are common in Africa where there can be no doubt. Dr. C.K. Meek tells me that in West Africa, the inhabitants of a village group often claim that the inhabitants of the various villages are in each case descended from a son of the first settler, but that an examination shows that many of them came from various foreign localities in quite recent times. The legend of common ancestry is pure invention to promote a feeling of solidarity, or in some cases to explain the fact that the group is an exogamous unit. The Noyers and Dinkas are Nilotic tribes of the Sudan, and Dr. Evans Pritchard found that Dinkas who have been adopted into the clans of the Noyer conquerors give pedigrees showing pure Noyer descent. The process is similar to by which converts to Judaism become pure-blooded descendants of Abraham. We thus see arrayed in defense of false genealogy the powerful forces of religion and patriotism, of custom and tradition, of family pride and individual vanity, and of euhemerism and rationalization, not to mention the popular love of the marvelous and the romantic. On the other side are only the puny and disunited columns of critical investigation. It is not surprising that, although hundreds of them have been proved false and none have ever been proved true, the traditional pedigrees still hold the field. So let me just see. A little drop there of euhemerism. God, because I read this chapter not too long ago, and I remember I'm always amused when people slag off classicists. I kind of wonder why. What's your point? Where are you going with this? And it often doesn't end well for them as well, I think. Let me just see before we jump on. Yeah, but just remember having him that. Yes, all these the euhemerists, he doesn't like them. This part is talking about genealogies, which are kind of again an oral tradition, particularly. I was just thinking about what he said there in relation to my own family. My mother's passed away now. Goodness, she passed away in 2009. So it's been about 16 years. But in terms of 2025, I've got family photos. Oh goodness. Oh, my eyes watering. Death certificates going back to 1888 or so. Roughly that same sort of period of time. Photographs. And my mum, not that I could do this, could have told, my mum had the sort of memory that she could have told you the names of every single person, all the photographs, all the relatives, all of them going all the way back. Goodness, I'm going to have to pause a second, folks. My throat has just gone, and my eyes are watering, and we need to go gargle or something. I'll be right back. Excuse me. Pardon me, sorry folks, that just totally caught my throat. Just so I get a wee dry, and all the fluids in the world won't sort it out. Well, I feel like I'm going to sneeze now. That'll be great, wouldn't it? All right. Sneezy, sneeze. Hang on, stand by somewhere. That'll do. There you go. Just in case. Oral traditions established part of the ancient world in the colonial eras. Literacy became a marker of status. Literate English and Scots and literate Irish is a stereotype. Yes, indeed. Yet at the same time, a lot of the masterpieces of English literature are Irish people, Irish writers, aren't they? Pardon me, a lot of them. We've some, yeah, we're very literate here. It is indeed a very poor stereotype of the Irish. But there are still illiterate people. I know a couple of people who are illiterate in this country. Not to put them down. They're of a certain age and of a certain generation. Angela Burke calls oral tradition a system of very complex code, which often carries a multiplicity of hidden meanings. Yes, indeed. And I think oral tradition does have. Pardon me. Certainly, in this is an old country here. There is a longevity to these things. I know stories. I know stories, folk stories, and traditional stories. That from this in this country that have been told for hundreds and over 1,000 years. Now, as much as what Raglan said, the written word is a great transmitter of ideas. Yeah, it is. There's other things that do this too as well. But his importance on it, certainly in terms of, no, he's trying to, I suppose what he is trying to say is that one thing creates the other in this. Now, not to waste too much more time on this, we're going to jump through, we're not going to read everything here with Lord Raglan's ideas. I am quite surprised to see that the book's not on something like Project Gutenberg. I don't particularly want to sit and type this out for other people, but I'd be happy to scan it if it came to it. I wonder, can you do that like that? Because it's part of a little collection of books on heroes from this era, I feel like, that I think are all great. They're worth reading for one of those reasons that it's simply put, some books like this are worth reading because they develop your critical thinking. If you see it, I mean, Raglan presents lots of quite interesting stuff, and he's kind of wrong about a lot of it, but he's got an enthusiasm for it. He's a bit posh. He's a bit snobby about some of this stuff, but it's a good one to sort of get your teeth into and have a general think about what he says and go and look and examine other heroes and try put his work to the test, really. If you see what I mean. The reason was, I mean, he has a go at sort of people like himself as well. So he's clearly a wee bit above all this kind of stuff, Anyway, yeah, I was hoping to find that wee bit where he just slags off classicists and stuff, and he goes on about folk memory and so on. That was the wee thing from the introduction to point out. Folk memory, race memory, this kind of thing. But anyway, in his book with local tradition, I suppose he jumps into part one of his book. That's what we've just read. That was the overall introduction to the book. Where are we? Come on, index. There we go. So, within that part on tradition, he would look at Robin Hood, King Arthur, Hengist, and Horse. And there's a section on Cuchulainn there as well, and has a little bit of the look at Troy. Within those kind of things. In fact, the Troy kind of thing pervades through the different aspects, tradition, myth, and drama of the book. Let's see, Cuchulainn would be kind of. I was thinking about Cuchulainn a bit the other day. What a great hero he is! Wouldn't it be great to make some kind of like Rambo type film of Cuchulainn? Yeah, when you hear this, sorry, I'll just jump forward. This is from the Tale of Troy, chapter 9. I found it. He says, what we saw in the last chapter that Sir William Ridgway compared Cuchulainn to Achilles and Ajax. In this chapter, it will be our task to show that Achilles and Ajax are really unhistorical, as unhistorical as Cuchulainn. They may seem to be, he basically believes that pretty much all of these people aren't real. As unhistorical as Cuchulainn, they may seem to be a rash undertaking, since dozens of scholars have written books about Homer, and almost all of them have assumed, as a matter of course, that the Iliad has an historical basis. It does. It has to be noted, however, in the first place, that with the great majority of these scholars, the historical aspect of the Iliad has been merely incidental to other aspects in which they are more deeply interested, those of poetry, prosody, and linguistics on the one hand, and the religion and politics of 5th century BC on the other. That's utter crap. Classical scholars are, in the second place, for the most part, completely ignorant of and indifferent to comparative mythology and ritual, and therefore regard incidents to which parallels can be found in every continent as individual or even unique. Thirdly, of course, these scholars have been brought up in the superstition that tradition is history. Thanks for speaking for me there, Lord Raglan. You're talking bollocks. What an amazing load of shite. So just there you go. That's why we take some of this with a pinch of salt. Now, let's find out what he says, the myth and ritual. Because as much as I'm wanting to be reading through, getting through this for you guys, it's for those who are interested in it. The stuff that really affects Frank Herbert's Dune series. So it's myth and ritual and the bit on the hero. It's a good bit to read. Let's see. 144. In fact, we could be selective a wee bit, but that's the whole point of it, is to read this to you guys. Pardon me. All right. Let's see. We've got a good bit to get through. It's not a massive book. And then we've got to get to the hero chapter. Let me just bookmark that. We'll maybe not go through all of this. It goes on to the Tale of Troy. But you'll get the myth and ritual. We'll go with one chapter and see how we do. So, the position which we have now reached is that the folktale is never of popular origin, but is merely one form of the traditional narrative. Well, the traditional narrative has no basis either in history or in philosophical speculation, but is derived from the myth, and that the myth is a narrative connected with a rite. I think that's utter crap. But anyway, that's the basis of his book. The theory that all traditional narratives are myths, that is to say that they are connected with ritual, may be maintained upon 5 grounds. I know myths that aren't connected to rituals. But there's no other satisfactory way in which they can be explained. This is number 1. As the whole of this book is intended to establish this proposition, I shall not refer to it in particular here. That these narratives are concerned primarily and chiefly with supernatural beings, kings and heroes. Oh, excuse me, my nose is running. That miracles play a large part in them. That the same scenes and incidents appear in many parts of the world, and that many of these scenes and incidents are explicable in terms of known rituals. Excuse me a wee second, folks. I'm going to run out of tissue paper here. I'm going to blow my nose. I'll be right back and we'll get on with it. ping. There we go. Julian said, I'll try to see what Cucullin would score. I have to go, Doc. Thanks so much. No worries, Julian. Night all. He's in here, isn't he? He's got a score. Let's see. I'll tell you. Isn't he? Is he? No, he's not actually. He hasn't done him. That's odd. Apollo, Pelops, Bellerophon. Pelops is here. Yeah, he hasn't scored him. I actually thought he was there. Because he talks a fair bit about him. He hasn't scored him at all. Yes, indeed. See what Cucullin would score. We could probably work that out. Magical birth, etc. So there we go. It was one. This is the chapter on myth and ritual. This is chapter 8 in the book. It was once supposed that the idea of a god or a gods was innate, but thinking persons have realized since the day of Locke that there are no innate ideas. The idea that it is natural to believe in the supernatural has only to be stated to show its absurdity. Apart from innate ideas, we have inspirations and revelation. But even if all the claims made for these were admitted, they would still fail to provide to an explanation for at least 3/4 of the phenomena connected with the belief in supernatural beings. Nobody, so far as I know, has claimed that the quarrels of the gods in the Iliad were divinely revealed to Homer. Okay. Passing over the kings and heroes for a moment, we come to the miraculous elements in our narratives. It may be said that miracles never happen, but that does not explain the important fact, which is that they are believed to happen. Further than that, an occurrence is never considered miraculous unless it is believed to be due to the action either of a supernatural being or of a human being endowed with supernatural power, unless it is believed to have a significant effect upon the fortunes of human beings. He left out luck there, blind luck. An earthquake is in itself not a miracle. It becomes a miracle when it destroys the ungodly or when the godly have a narrow escape. In religious literature, it is used interchangeably with the word sign, and we often hear of signs and wonders. Now, a sign is essentially a preparatory act, a minor wonder performed as a preliminary to a major wonder. In my view, this sign is the ritual act. It seems to me that is to say that when an African rainmaker pours beer upon the sacred rainstones with the appropriate ceremonies, he is making a sign or signal to the rain to fall. We find here all the characteristics of a miracle. Firstly, it is performed by a person believed to be endowed with a superhuman power. Secondly, the end proposed is recognized as a proper one for superhuman action. Thirdly, the ritual is the recognized means of bringing about such action. To be honest with you, couldn't you just call that inductive reasoning? Oddly enough, yeah, you know. So there we go. Signs, portents, and stuff like that. Right. When we use the expression to perform a miracle, we normally confuse the action of the miracle worker with the supposed result of that action. We are apt to think of the miracle worker as performing some quite impossible action, such as turning a person into a pig. If we study the narratives, however, we shall see that what he really does is some quite simple action. The conjurer, the sham miracle worker, pretends to perform his feats by waving a wand and saying, "Hey presto," but this is all that the real miracle worker, the ritualist, does, as a study of the stories will show. The miracle takes place not as a direct result of the miracle worker's act, but as the result of a ceremony in which the miracle worker's act is the culminating rite. If we take the story of Cinderella and examine its miracles, we find exactly the same features present as in the rain-making rite mentioned above. In the first place, the miracle worker is a being endowed with supernatural power, the fairy godmother. Secondly, the object, that is, the provision of a suitable equipment for one who is herself to be a queen, a person endowed with supernatural power. is a proper object for supernatural invention. Thirdly, the fairy godmother is not supposed to be able to make something out of nothing, but must go through the proposed ritual, the proper ritual, sorry. What the bear and the sacred stones are to the rainmaker, the magic wand and the pumpkin are to her. She is, in fact, a ritual personage using ritual objects to perform ritual acts. In the same way, we find that the hero, whether of myth, saga, or fairy tale, cannot injure the monster without the magic weapons, and that nobody else can use the magic weapons to injure the monster. Again, the hero with the magic weapons, against the hero with the magic weapons, the monster is powerless. He falls at the first blow. This is because the hero is a ritual personage using ritual weapons to deliver a ritual blow. The machinery of the traditional miracle, far from suggesting that it is either the product of an unfettered imagination or the embellished version of an historical incident, bears witness to its ritual origin. There's often a case where Beowulf's a good example of this. The hero, the sword breaks, the weapon fails the hero, often because it's a gift from somebody who's evil or flawed or something like that, or it's part of a plot to bring down the hero. That a weapon will break on the hero, and it's a common thing. I think it's and these heroes, when the hero breaks, the sword breaks, the sword would. The point of these swords is that the sword would never have harmed the monster in the first place. Usually, when this happens with a hero, it's the weapon's gone, it's knuckle, it's hands only, it's wrestling and physical strength, and you get that, for example, with Beowulf. Theseus defeats the Minotaur with just physical strength, regardless of the brains. So it's in the broken sword in myths and the weapon failing the hero is something that Raglan's not considered at all here. Yeah, it's not merely myths and fairy tales which contain these reminiscences of ritual, but the sagas, romances, and even novels which are based upon them, not to mention their verse forms, the epic, the ballad, and even the nursery rhyme. It is proper to use these terms as long as they are understood to refer to the form of the stories and not their contents. But if people claim, as certain folklorists do, that they can tell from the form of a story whether it originated in fact, fiction, or philosophical speculation, then they have left the realm of science, if they were in it, for that of, if they ever were in it, for that of prejudice. That's a bit cheeky. The manner in which traditional stories are transformed in romance is well described by Professor Kittredge, who shows how supernatural creatures of the most various kinds exchange roles with bewildering nonchalance, or are reduced to the status of robbers, knights, ladies, or other classes of ordinary mortals. The other world may appear as an island or a castle or a cave or an orchard or a fair meadow or even the Christian hell. Key Leader tells us that the substitution of enchanted for supernatural beings is due to rationalization. It brings the supernatural personages down to the level of humanity and makes them thoroughly reasonable, natural creatures. The process then is of the same kind as that by which gods become heroes, or by which animal spouses became not real animals, but men transformed for the time into brute shape. As time goes on, however, the very idea of enchantment may itself come to seem unreasonable, and therefore an attempt is sometimes made by the storyteller to represent the strange events as due to natural causes or to tell them as facts, with no mention of the superhuman. This kind of rationalizing is extremely common in Arthurian romance, and it frequently results in contradiction or sheer incomprehensibility. The same may be said for the rationalizing of our euhemerists. Professor Griffith, dealing with the story of Lugh, says that the 4 stages through which it has grown to its present form in the Mabinogi can be set down as follows. First stage, mythology. Of Lugh as a god, we have considerable evidence. Second stage, mythology becomes history. And again, that's kind of off if Raglan's idea of history is off. Third stage, mythological history becomes folklore. Fourth stage, folklore is utilized to form literary tales. Pardon me. It is pretty certain that every old story has passed through a series of vicissitudes, and it is clearly impossible to reconstruct the original form by the aid of taste alone. We can, however, say with some confidence that we have two or more versions of the same story. The older is likely to be nearer to the mythical, that is, the ritual type. This applies not merely to stories, but also to folk songs and folk customs. Dr. C.B. Lewis, after making a study of the nursery rhyme, "Where are you going to, my pretty maid?" and then of the folk customs connected with May Day, summarizes the question as follows. The conclusion then is the same as the one we reached with regard to our nursery rhymes. The folk has neither part nor lot in the making of folklore. The source of our folk song and folk customs is religion. On the one hand, Christian religion, on the other hand, pagan. At what date in history these elements of religion turned the one into folk song, the other into folklore, it is difficult to affirm, and indeed it is a different date in each case. But one may perhaps venture to say that it is when the religious origin of the themes in question was finally forgotten. From that moment on, the theme of our song and the details of our customs changed more rapidly than before, were even simplified or whittled down by this or that trait falling into oblivion, until they now appear as pearls of such pure loveliness that only the folk, it is thought, in a far distant past could have conceived them. Thus, folklore and folk song, at least in the cases we have considered, turn out to be the last stage of an age-long evolution, and not by any means of the first beginnings. That's from that book, Folklore again. This age-long evolution probably began, like most of the earlier elements of our culture, in the valleys of the Nile, the Euphrates, or the Indus. Dr. Lewis traces the songs and customs with which he deals back to southwestern Asia, the culture which is largely influenced by that of the great agricultural civilizations. So there we go. That's kind of interesting. It's a horrific viewpoint there. It's not only a sort of an imperialist viewpoint, but it's an imperialist Christian viewpoint. That you can't have folklore without Christianity, which is absolute nonsense. Dear oh dear. Object degree saying early rise upon the morrow, all the best. Talk. No worries, Object degree. Take it easy. Have a good one. It's Saturday tomorrow, isn't it? Yeah, it's me reading from a book mostly tonight. Unfortunately, a couple more pages to go with this, and then we just have the little section for on Raglan's little ritualistic run through the 22 steps. In these countries, but take it easy, Object degree. All the best. For anybody who's just joining me, who's this weirdo? What's he at? I'm reading something from Lord Raglan's The Hero, which is a book that influenced Frank Herbert, and it's particularly just the section on myth and ritual. With not much further to go. It's something I promised to read, basically because this book is not easy to get a hold of. Oddly enough, checking it out tonight, you can't even get it on Project Gutenberg, which makes me think I should probably scan it, I think. Anyway, let's push on. A couple more pages and we're done through this chapter, I hope. Yes. Let's see. In these countries, the livelihood of the people depended upon the river flood, and we have good reason to believe that from very early times they were ruled, or perhaps rather reigned over, by kings whose principal duty it was to ensure by means of ritual that the floods should be punctual and adequate. The flood myths probably originated as descriptions of this ritual. I don't think so. But the functions of the king were by no means limited by the production of floods. They had also to ensure the fertility of women and animals, success in war, hunting and fishing, freedom from disease, in fact, the general prosperity of the community. This duty they discharged by means of a complex ritual in which they pretended to destroy the old world and create a new one. The descriptions of this ritual are the creation myths, in which the flood myths are included. Um, It is obvious that the kings could not be uniformly successful, and that people would remember years in which the crops or the hunting had been better than last year or the year before. Even among ourselves, vague memories of certain facts combined with misconceptions of others readily coalesce into a belief in good old days, in which things in general were much better than they are now. Such good old days among ourselves are often associated with good Queen Bess or good King Charles, but in a community without records, that very small modicum of fact, which among most English people passes for the history of these monarchs, would be completely lost, and the golden age might not be believed to be much more recent and much more golden. And what do we mean when we say that Charles was a good king? We certainly do not mean that he was a good man. A good king is one whose subjects prosper, whether he is himself virtuous and kindly or not. I don't know. This applies much more fully in the case of a king whose duties are purely ritual. Just as the good rainmaker is the one who induces good rain, so the good king is the king who induces good crops, good hunting, and so on. The land and the king would be one, that kind of thing. The ideal is one not of supreme moral perfection, but of supreme functional efficiency. Vague memories of especially good kings may lead to the belief in the supremely good king. This king becomes the originator of the ritual, but not in a historical sense, because it must be repeated. The idea of history is meaningless to the ritualist. History is what happens once, but things that happen once only are nothing to the ritualist, who is concerned only with things that are done again and again. One thing done again and again, generally, isn't it? Myth is ritual projected back into the past, not an historical past of time, but a ritual past of eternity. Double talk here, isn't it? It's a description of what should be done by a king, priest, chief, or magician in order to secure and maintain the prosperity of his people, told in the form of a narrative of what is a hero, that is, an ideal king, etc., once did. And not only a hero, but a heroine, for in ritual the queen is as important, or nearly as important as the king, and a queen can ensure prosperity and also victory, though she may never go near a battle. Myths are concerned almost entirely with gods and heroes, or goddesses and heroines, because they are accounts of royal ritual. It may be urged that if all myths are derived from the royal ritual of the Nile in this region, then all myths should be alike. In fact, many myths are extremely widespread. This fact has been generally realized, except by exponents of the Aryan theory, but has been attributed to the alleged similar workings of the human mind. Again, think of when this book was written. This theory breaks down, however, when it is realized that however widespread certain features of myth and ritual may be, other myths and rites have a distribution comparable, let us say, to that of the Muslim religion. Nobody asserts that because we find in Java and in Nigeria men who marry 4 wives and pray 5 times a day. The human mind works naturally in the direction of 4 wives and 5 daily prayers. No belief or practice can be claimed as natural unless it is universal, and even the most widespread myths and rites are not that. I think he's thinking about laws there, isn't he? But they're not universal. The myths vary with the ritual, and both, especially among the illiterate, tend to reflect political and economic conditions. A ritual developed among a people who both kept cattle and cultivated the soil might spread on the one hand to pastoral nomads, and on the other to cultivators who kept no cattle. One part of the ritual would then die out, and as it would, of course, not be the same part, it might come to be supposed that the 2 rituals were quite independent. The beliefs that the sun drives in a chariot and that the moon sails in a boat are both derived from ritual and tend to die out among people who have no chariots or no boats, though they usually leave traces. See, I mean, it really does not make any sense. This that the ritual would come first before the story, in any sense of the way. But the political environment is perhaps more important than the economic in the development of retention of myth and ritual. The original ritual, so far as we can be judged from the general pattern, was based on the existence of a king who was killed and replaced annually. That's kind of the idea of tanistry. 100 myths describe his death and the installation of a successor. Such a system suggests a centralized kingdom with not more than a trinity of gods. Pardon me, gods who represent the old king, the new king, and the queen. Extended polytheism might due to the rise of empires in which the god of the capital reigns over the gods of other cities, or to the existence of loose confederations such as that of Greece, in which Zeus is supposed to reign rather uncertainly over a large number of other deities, just as Agamemnon is supposed to reign rather uncertainly over a large number of other kings and chiefs. Thus, myth and ritual, though probably derived, like logarithms, from a common source, are, so long as they are alive, and especially so long as they remain, unwritten, continually subject to changes induced by local conditions, that they have remained in general so similar as evidence, not of the similar working of the human mind, but of that inertia which is in general its most salient characteristic. Oh, for the love of God! I thought. Oh no, yeah, I did. Oh, that was good. I turned 2 pages at once there. Now that chapter's continued there, and you get the sense of this guy, I suppose. I really don't want to read any more of that, and I suppose I should, but he goes on a bit. But you get the gist of where Raglan goes with a lot of this stuff. But just very much to finish up for tonight, because it's a quiet room and I don't think there's anybody about. I'm just going to finish off this little section from the hero, and this is the important bit, really. Apart from there's a few other things in this book. But this is from chapter 16 of the hero, and this is called the hero, and this is where we get Lord Raglan's 22 steps for the hero. 22 ritualistic steps, if you like, that the story must pass through. So I'll read this and then I'll wrap up, because it's me talking to myself at the moment. So there you go. Not that we mind, because we know people can't always make it on here, and that people watch this afterwards. So this is just an attachment to our little book club, folks, which we'll be back with next week. This was just to read some stuff from Lord Raglan's The Hero, but this is the justy bit that's here. So let's just get through it. It says, in the earlier chapters of this book, I took a succession of well-known heroes of tradition and attempted to show that there's no justification for believing that any of these heroes were real persons, or that any of the stories of their exploits had any historical foundation. This is one of the reasons, by the way, that Lord Raglan's book is just sunk completely. I'll give you a list of them in a minute, but I know for a fact that some of these people are real. Not all of them, but some of them. So that's his problem. He thinks none of these people have any basis in reality whatsoever. I couldn't disagree more. And unfortunately for Lord Raglan, where do you get the evidence from? It is from the written word, but it's also from archaeological evidence as well. So there's a number of these I would suggest. Is there a historical author? I would go with yes. Who else have we got here? Joseph, most likely. Moses, I would say no. As a composite character, I think. Elijah, I wouldn't comment on. Who else have we got here? Pelops, I would say is yes. Pelops was real, I think. And then we get Heracles, I would go with is real. Theseus, I would go with is real. Perseus, most likely is real. Jason's probably real. Oedipus, I'd argue is real. But the one that I think he hasn't gone with here that I would pick out, Odysseus. We've got Agamemnon is mentioned there. We have inscriptions, we have civil service records, etc. Some of the characters from the Alia, the Odyssey, etc. As you know, are real people. They existed historically. So here we go, just going on from this. That's Raglan's one of his many problems, I suppose, that they're just not real, he thinks. They're not of fact, but of ritual, that is, myths. They're not the same thing. Since my chief object in these chapters was, however, to show that the heroes had no claim to historicity, I made no attempt to link them or the beliefs connected with them to any general ritual scheme. Before so doing, it seemed desirable to demonstrate, both theoretically and by examples, the intimate association of myth with ritual, an association which has been recognized by many leading students of the subjects and upon which depends the validity of the conclusions which I have reached. Rituals are associated with myths, yes, indeed. Why wouldn't they be? Some years ago, I had occasion to study the myth of Oedipus, probably one of the most misunderstood myths in Western civilization, and try to analyze it. And I was struck by the similarity of many of the incidences in it to incidences in the stories of Theseus and Romulus. I then examined the stories of a number of other traditional heroes of Greece and found that when these stories were split up into separate incidents, there were certain types of incident which ran through all the stories. Not all of them, but some. And yeah, it happens. But a lot of the Greek myths are pretty individual things, I think. Whether these parallels have any significance or whether they are merely coincidences, the sort of thing that might happen to or be readily invented about any hero, are questions to which we shall come later. My first task is to show that the parallels exist, and for that purpose, it is necessary to tabulate and number them. Basically, the most simple form of any kind of what you want to go with monomyths or Lord Raglan's 22 ritualistic steps. It is a kind of systemic approach to looking at this stuff. Is you can break it down to 3 steps, if you like. All stories have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And on some level, that's what these people who do this kind of thing with mythography are doing. So they'll fit in a couple of extra steps. They're looking for a commonality to, like, a story. And then they're looking for patterns that they perceive there, and their ideas are badly flawed, I think. So here we go. What I've done is taken a dozen heroes whose stories are narrated in sufficient detail to tabulate the incidents in their careers and to regard as typical. Such instances occur in the majority of the stories. By tabulating these typical incidents, I have arrived at what appears to be a pattern in which I include all incidents, whether they are miraculous or whether they seem insignificant, which occur with sufficient regularity. I have then fitted the pattern back onto my dozen heroes, and finding that it fits, have extended it to a number of heroes from outside the classical area, with what have been to me surprising results. I should like it to be quite clear that it is the potted biographies which follow. That in the potted biographies which follow, there is no intention of giving a complete account of the heroes. Irrelevant incidents and alternative versions are omitted, and no attempt is made to distinguish between genuine mythology, that is, mythology connected with ritual, and the imitation mythology, which probably forms a large part of the stories of Arthur and of Romulus. It's quite appalling what Raglan's doing here, to be honest with you. He's massively full of it, isn't he? The wearing of an imitation sword may be just as significant as the wearing of a real one, and it is with the uniform of the heroes and not with their outfitters that I am at present concerned. The pattern then is as follows. So here we go. This is Lord Raglan's 22 ritualistic steps that the heroes go through. So the pattern then is as follows. Number 1, the hero's mother is a royal virgin. Number 2, his father is a king. And number 3, often a near relative of his mother. But 4, the circumstances of his conception are unusual. And 5, he is also reputed to be the son of a god. 6, at birth an attempt is made, usually by his father or his maternal grandfather, to kill him. But 7, he is spirited away. And 8, reared by foster parents in a far country. 9, we are told nothing of his childhood, but 10, on reaching manhood, he returns or goes to his future kingdom. 11, after a victory over the king and or giant, dragon, or wild beast. 12, he marries a princess, often the daughter of his predecessor. And 13, becomes king. 14, for a time he reigns uneventfully. And 15, prescribes laws. But 16, later he loses favour with the gods and or his subjects, and 17 is driven from the throne and city, after which 18 he meets with a mysterious death, 19 often at the top of a hill, 20 his children, if any, do not succeed him, 21 his body is not buried, but nevertheless 22 he has one or more holy sepulchres. And then he goes on to say, let us now apply this pattern to our heroes, and we will start with Oedipus. So I will read you the Oedipus one, and then I think that will do me for the night, because that's my throat getting a bit, pardon me. So within the pattern, in fact, I need fluids, folks. And we'll just wrap up after this. So Oedipus' mother, this is in the steps here. His mother Jocasta is one, a princess, and his father is two, King Laius, who like her is three of the line of Cadmus. He is sworn to have no connection with her, but four, does so when drunk, probably, five, in the character of Dionysus. No. Laius 6 tries to kill Oedipus at birth, but 7 he is spirited away and yet reared by the king of Corinth. 9 we hear nothing of his childhood, but 10 on reaching manhood he returns to Thebes, after 11 gaining victories over his father and the Sphinx. He 12 marries Jocasta and 13 becomes king. For some years he 14 reigns uneventfully, but 16 later comes to be regarded as the cause of a plague, and 17 is deposed and driven into exile. He's left out 15 now, the making of laws, by the way, prescribing laws. Comes to be regarded as the cause of a plague, and 17 is disposed and driven into exile. He meets with 18 a mysterious death at 19, a place near Athens called the Steep Pavement. He is succeeded by 20 Creon, through whom he was deposed, and through 21 the place of his burial is uncertain, and he has 22 several holy sepulchres. He does not seem to be regarded as a legislator. He does, I think, and apart from that, we may award him full marks for Oedipus. So there we go, folks, and that's the one that we have the overlay of Paul Atreides on. And that's it, really. I think I'll call that a night for tonight. One of those things. So we'll just have to pack it up there for the night, folks. I'm a wee bit tired. The throat's getting sore, but that was a wee bit of the stuff that we promised to read you from the hero. So hopefully it wasn't too boring for you. But it's a book that we've talked about a wee bit, and it was just interesting to see it doesn't seem to be easily gotten hold of there. So this is the book that really informed kind of Frank Herbert's thinking on his hero and the steps that Paul Atreides goes through. I think it goes through steps 1 to 12 in Dune, and then the rest through Children of Dune, or Dune Messiah up to Children of Dune. So there we go. So hopefully we'll be back on Thursday with another chapter of the book club, folks. And in the meantime, look after yourselves, take it easy, and we'll see you all real soon. I'll say good night. All the very best. Bye-bye. Bye now. Bye-bye. Oh, I hear that call. Oh, I'm coming, baby. I'm coming. I'm coming, Holly. Hang on, love. Bye-bye.